The air in the sanctuary was thick with the scent of white lilies and expensive perfume. The church choir was in the middle of a mournful gospel hymn, their voices echoing off the tall stained glass windows. I sat in the front row, staring blankly at the polished mahogany casket. It was closed. It had to be closed after the horrific fiery car crash that supposedly took my husband from me. My hands were trembling in my lap. Then my phone buzzed against my leg. A harsh, vibrating disruption in the middle of a funeral. I slipped it out of my purse, expecting a message of condolences from an extended family member. Instead, a chill ran down my spine as I read a text message from an unknown number. "I am still alive. Keep it secret. Trust no one." My heart stopped beating for a full second. I looked around the crowded church, suddenly realizing that the nightmare was not over. It was just beginning. My name is Valerie. I am 58 years old, and up until 3 days ago, I thought I was about to spend my golden years peacefully with my husband, Marcus. I spent decades as a forensic accountant, tracking hidden money, deciphering complex ledgers, and catching liars for a living. I retired to enjoy the quiet life, while Marcus continued running Davis Logistics, his massive trucking empire. But nothing could have prepared me for the lies festering inside my own family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever realized that the people you share blood with are the ones you need to protect yourself against the most. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I handled the vultures circling my husband's grave. I was still staring at the glowing screen of my phone, my mind spinning into a million different directions. Was it a cruel prank, a sick joke, or was Marcus really out there? I did not have a single second to process the monumental shock before a shadow fell over me. I looked up to see my daughter Chloe. She is 32 years old, but she was dressed like she was attending a dark-themed runway show rather than her own father's funeral. She wore a tailored designer dress that hugged her curves a little too tightly. Her hair was perfectly blown out, and there was not a single tear stain on her flawlessly contoured face. She did not offer me a hug. She did not ask how I was holding up or if I needed a glass of water. Instead, she dropped a thick manila folder right onto my lap, right over my trembling hands. I looked up at her completely confused. "What is this, Chloe?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice down while the pastor stepped up to the pulpit to prepare for the eulogy. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume completely masking the scent of the funeral flowers. "It is an emergency power of attorney, Mom," she said, her voice entirely too loud and entirely too casual for a grieving daughter. "You need to sign it right now." I blinked, trying to bridge the massive mental gap between the cryptic text message on my phone and the legal document sitting on my lap. "Sign what right now? We are at your father's funeral. We are about to bury him." Chloe rolled her eyes and sighed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest. "Yes, Mom, and it is a tragedy. It really is. But the world does not stop spinning just because we are sad. Preston says we need to move fast." I glanced over her shoulder. Standing a few pews back, leaning against a marble pillar, was her husband, Preston, a slick, arrogant Wall Street finance guy who always looked at our family like we were nothing more than an open bank vault. He was wearing a sharp gray suit, checking his luxury watch. When he saw me looking, he gave me a tight, fake smile and nodded his head toward the folder on my lap. I looked back at Chloe, and despite my overwhelming grief and the shock of the text message, my forensic accountant instincts kicked in. The numbers and the motives always tell the truth. "Why does Preston need power of attorney, Chloe?" I asked, my voice steadying and dropping to a cold whisper. She tapped her manicured fingernail impatiently against the folder. "For the life insurance policy, obviously. The $10 million. Preston says the market is incredibly volatile right now. If we do not secure the funds and invest them by the end of the business day, we could miss out on a massive yield. Just sign the paper, Mom. Give Preston the authorization so he can handle the heavy lifting. You are too emotional to manage that kind of money anyway. You have been retired for years." I sat there looking at my own flesh and blood. My husband was not even in the ground yet. The choir was still humming the final notes of their song, and my golden child daughter was trying to legally secure $10 million of my money before the pastor even said amen. My blood ran absolutely cold. I thought about the text message. Trust no one. I slowly slid my phone back into my purse, making sure it was hidden deep at the bottom, and placed my hands flat on the manila folder. I flipped it open. Sure enough, it was a comprehensive legal document drafted to give Preston Sterling full, uncontested control over my financial assets, specifically citing the payout from the Davis estate. It was predatory, it was calculated, and it was printed on premium paper, meaning they had drafted this the second they heard Marcus was dead. "Chloe," I said slowly, making sure every single word cut through the heavy air of the church. "You are standing in front of God, in front of our entire community, asking me to sign away a $10 million estate while your father is resting in a box 3 feet away from us. Do you hear yourself?" She scowled, her mask of fake grief slipping completely to reveal the entitled brat I had spent years making excuses for. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Mom. Dad would want us to be smart about this. He would want Preston to handle the investments because Preston actually knows how wealth management works in the modern era. You are just a retired accountant who used to look at boring spreadsheets. You do not understand high-level hedge funds. If you do not sign this right now, we are going to lose thousands of dollars in potential returns today alone. Do not be selfish." I felt a massive surge of adrenaline wash away my sorrow. For the past 3 days, I had been the weeping widow surrounded by people offering empty prayers and casseroles. But right now, looking at the pure, unadulterated greed flashing in my daughter's eyes and remembering the chilling words on my burner phone, the weeping widow died. The forensic accountant woke up. I picked up the heavy folder, neatly closed it, and shoved it hard right back into her stomach. "I am not signing anything," I whispered fiercely, locking my eyes onto hers. "Not today. Not tomorrow, not ever. And tell your husband that if he comes near me with another legal document while I am mourning my husband, I will make sure the entire congregation, the pastor, and every single business associate of your father's knows exactly why his precious Wall Street investment firm is so utterly desperate for my money." Chloe stumbled back a step, clutching the folder to her chest. Her face turned bright red, a mixture of deep embarrassment and pure venomous rage. Several people in the pews behind us turned their heads, whispering and pointing at the disruption. She glared at me, her voice dropping to a nasty hiss. "You are going to regret this, Mom. You cannot hide that money from us. You do not know what is going on behind the scenes. Preston is not going to let this go." She spun on her designer heels and marched back up the aisle, her loud footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor to where her husband was waiting. I watched Preston grab her arm, his face twisting in sudden anger as she shook her head and held up the unsigned folder. They were a team, a desperate, greedy, and dangerous team. And as I turned my attention back to the closed casket at the front of the church, I felt the phone resting heavy in my purse. I closed my eyes and took a very deep breath. Marcus was out there. Someone had tried to kill him. And looking at the sheer desperation of my daughter and her husband, I realized that the enemy was not some faceless stranger hiding in the shadows. The enemy was sitting right here in the sanctuary with me, waiting for me to lower my guard. I straightened my posture, wiped my dry eyes, and prepared for war. The heavy wooden doors of the church swung open. The crisp afternoon air hit my face, but it did nothing to clear the suffocating tension in my chest. The pallbearers were carefully guiding the polished mahogany casket down the stone steps toward the waiting hearse. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching the black vehicle that was supposed to carry my husband to his final resting place. But my mind was entirely consumed by the burner phone resting at the bottom of my black leather purse. I am still alive. Keep it secret. Trust no one. Those words echoed louder than the church bells ringing above us. I wanted to get into my car and drive away from this nightmare. I wanted to lock the doors of my home and figure out what was really happening. But before I could take a single step toward the parking lot, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. The grip was tight enough to bruise. I turned around and found myself staring directly into the pale, angry face of my son-in-law, Preston. The fake, supportive smile he had been wearing inside the sanctuary was completely gone. His jaw was clenched tight, and a dark vein pulsed at his temple. Chloe stood a few steps behind him, crossing her arms and glaring at me like I was a misbehaving child. The other funeral guests were gathered near the hearse, offering their final respects, which meant Preston and I were completely isolated on the upper landing. He had cornered me on purpose. "Valerie, we need to have a serious conversation right now," Preston said. His voice was a low, menacing growl that completely lacked the respect a man should have for his grieving mother-in-law. "You made a massive scene in there. You embarrassed Chloe in front of her friends, and you completely disrespected my professional judgment." I brushed his heavy hand off my shoulder. I straightened my black dress and looked him directly in the eye. "I did not make a scene, Preston. I simply declined to sign a legally binding financial document while the choir was still singing over my husband's dead body. If you consider that a scene, then your moral compass is even more broken than I thought. Now step aside. I am going home." Preston let out a harsh, cruel laugh that made my blood boil. It was the laugh of an arrogant Wall Street finance bro who thought he was the smartest person in any room. He stepped directly into my path, blocking my way down the stairs. "You are not going anywhere, Valerie. You are going to stand right here and listen to me. You think you are so smart. You think because you spent 30 years as a forensic accountant looking at boring basic spreadsheets for local businesses that you understand how real wealth works. You do not know anything. You are just a financially illiterate old woman who is completely out of her depth." I felt a sharp sting of anger, but I kept my face perfectly neutral. I had spent my entire career sitting across from liars, thieves, and white-collar criminals. I knew how to handle men who tried to intimidate women with loud voices and cheap insults. "Preston, you are a hedge fund manager who drives a leased sports car and wears suits you cannot actually afford. Do not ever speak to me about wealth. My house is fully paid off. My retirement accounts are fully funded. I do not owe a single dime to anyone in this world. You cannot say the same. Now move out of my way before I call the security guard over here." Preston did not move. Instead, his cruel smile widened. His eyes gleamed with the toxic mixture of triumph and malice. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. "Is that right, Valerie? You think your house is fully paid off. You think you are completely secure." He pulled out a folded piece of thick white paper. He did not hand it to me. He held it up just out of my reach, unfolding it deliberately, slowly, so I could see the official bank letterhead at the top. "Let me educate you on your current financial reality," he sneered, "because clearly Marcus did not want to break your fragile little heart before he died. This is a promissory note. It is an official, legally binding commercial loan document, dated exactly 3 weeks ago, signed by Marcus Davis." My eyes scanned the document. Even from 2 feet away, my brain automatically processed the numbers, the dates, and the signatures. It was a reflex, a survival instinct honed by decades of forensic accounting. I saw the address of my home, the beautiful sprawling brick house that I had personally paid off 5 years ago. I saw the loan amount, $2.5 million. And then I saw the designated beneficiary account. It was the corporate account for Preston's failing investment firm. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was crumbling. The crisp air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "What is this?" I whispered. My voice shook despite my best efforts to remain calm. Preston leaned in extremely close until I could smell the strong peppermint gum on his breath. "This is the truth, Valerie. My fund took a massive hit last quarter. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. Chloe was panicking because she did not want to lose her country club membership and her luxury vacations. So we went to Marcus. We explained the situation. And Marcus, being a smart man who actually loves his daughter, decided to bail us out. He secretly took out a massive second mortgage on your precious, fully paid-off house. He wired the entire $2.5 million directly to my firm to cover my margin calls." I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. Marcus Davis. It looked real. But why would Marcus do this? Why would he risk our home, the only true sanctuary we had left, just to feed Preston's gambling addiction on Wall Street? Marcus knew Preston was a fraud. Marcus knew Chloe was greedy. It did not make any sense. Unless Marcus was forced. Unless this was connected to the text message hidden in my purse. "This is a forgery," I said firmly, forcing my voice to stop shaking. "Marcus would never mortgage our home without telling me. He would never give you that kind of money. You are a terrible investor and he knew it." Chloe stepped forward, her eyes flashing with pure entitlement. "Do not call my husband a terrible investor, Mom. Dad believed in him. Dad wanted to help us because he knew you were too cheap and too selfish to ever share your money with your own daughter. You have been sitting on all this wealth while we were struggling to maintain our lifestyle." Dad finally stepped up and did the right thing. I looked at my daughter in absolute horror. "Struggling to maintain your lifestyle. You live in a penthouse apartment, Chloe. You fly first class. You wear shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. You consider that struggling. You manipulated your father into risking the roof over my head so you could keep playing rich." Preston snapped the paper and folded it back into his pocket. "It does not matter what you think, Valerie. The bank does not care about your feelings. The loan is finalized. The money is gone. And since Marcus is currently lying in that wooden box over there, the debt transfers directly to his estate, which means it transfers directly to you." He checked his luxury watch again, feigning boredom, but I could see the desperate sweat gathering at his hairline. "You have exactly 30 days before the first massive repayment installment is due. If you miss that payment, the bank will immediately initiate foreclosure proceedings. They will seize the house. They will kick you out onto the street. You will have absolutely nothing." He took a step closer, crowding my personal space. "But there is a very simple solution to this problem, Valerie. You have the power of attorney documents. Sign them. Sign over control of the $10 million life insurance policy to me. I will use the insurance money to quietly pay off the mortgage on your house. I will invest the rest and give you a modest monthly allowance to live on. Everyone wins. I save my firm. Chloe gets to keep her lifestyle, and you do not end up living in a state-run nursing home. All you have to do is sign your name." The sheer audacity of his proposal left me temporarily speechless. They had not just come to the funeral to mourn. They had come to the funeral to execute a hostile takeover of my entire life. They had dug a financial grave for me and were currently offering to throw me a rope only if I handed over every single asset I owned. They were absolute leeches, sucking the lifeblood out of our family while hiding behind expensive suits and fake smiles. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was just a grieving widow, too blinded by sorrow to fight back. They forgot that I spent my entire adult life tracing dirty money, finding hidden assets, and tearing apart fraudulent contracts. I looked at Preston. I looked at the sweat on his forehead. He was terrified. He needed that $10 million right now. The $2.5 million was already gone, swallowed up by his massive debts, and he was still drowning. I took a slow, deep breath. The panic that had gripped my chest slowly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply looked at my son-in-law and smiled. A small, chilling smile that made him instantly step back. "You think you have me trapped, Preston?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You think a single piece of paper is going to make me hand over $10 million to a desperate failed broker? You underestimated me. You both did. I am not signing anything today. I am going to go home to my house. I am going to open my computer, and I am going to find out exactly where every single penny of that $2.5 million actually went." Preston's face drained of all color. Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but I simply walked right past them. I descended the church steps, my head held high, ignoring the frantic whispers behind me. The war had officially begun, and I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The drive back to my house from the cemetery was a blur of gray clouds and silent dread. My beautiful brick home usually felt like a warm sanctuary, but today it felt like a waiting room for a prison sentence. The driveway was already packed with luxury cars and practical sedans when I arrived. The traditional funeral repast was in full swing. The heavy scent of baked macaroni and cheese-fried chicken and collard greens filled the air, but my stomach churned at the thought of eating. Dozens of people were crowded into my living room and dining area, holding paper plates and speaking in hushed tones. They offered me sad smiles and gentle pats on the back, whispering their hollow condolences. I nodded and thanked them, walking through the crowd like a ghost haunting my own life. My mind was entirely consumed by the burner phone hidden safely in my bedroom upstairs and the devastating promissory note Preston had shoved in my face at the church. My own daughter and her arrogant Wall Street husband had conspired to steal my home, and now they wanted my husband's $10 million life insurance policy. They thought I was a weak old widow they could bully into submission. They were completely wrong. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood near the edge of the kitchen watching the room. Chloe and Preston were standing by the fireplace, holding hands and putting on a perfect performance of the grieving young couple. They were working the room, shaking hands with my husband's corporate associates and subtly positioning themselves as the new heirs to the Davis family empire. But the universe has a very funny way of disrupting the plans of greedy people. Just as Preston was leaning in to whisper something to a senior manager from Davis Logistics, the heavy oak front door swung open with a loud thud. The dull murmur of conversation in the room instantly died. Every head turned toward the entryway. Standing there, filling the doorframe with his broad shoulders and custom-tailored suit, was Marcus' younger brother Desmond. Desmond had always been a dark cloud hanging over our family. He was 5 years younger than Marcus, but he looked 10 years older, worn down by a lifetime of bitter jealousy and bad investments. Marcus had given him a job as a vice president at the logistics company out of pure family obligation. But Desmond had always resented playing second fiddle. He wanted the corner office, the massive salary, and the respect that Marcus had earned through decades of hard work. Desmond did not bother wiping his expensive leather shoes on the welcome mat. He marched straight into the dining room, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. He did not offer a hug or a word of sympathy for the brother he had just buried. Instead, he walked directly to the center of the long mahogany dining table and slammed his heavy palm down against the polished wood. The sharp crack echoed through the silent house, rattling the fine china plates and crystal glasses. Several elderly aunts jumped in their seats. "Listen up, everyone," Desmond shouted, his deep voice booming with an unnatural aggressive authority. "I know we are all here to mourn my brother Marcus. It is a terrible tragedy, a horrific accident, but life goes on and the business cannot stop. Davis Logistics moves millions of dollars of freight every single day. We have contracts, vendors, and hundreds of employees relying on us. The company needs strong leadership right now. It needs a firm hand at the wheel. And starting today, that hand is mine." A shocked gasp rippled through the living room. I set my glass of iced tea down on the granite counter, feeling a new wave of cold anger washing over me. First my daughter and now my brother-in-law. The vultures were not just circling anymore. They were actively landing on the dining table and demanding their piece of the flesh. Preston immediately stepped away from the fireplace, his face flushing bright red with sudden panic. He dropped his fake grieving son routine and marched toward the dining table. "Excuse me, Desmond," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is highly inappropriate. We are in the middle of a funeral reception. And furthermore, you are just a vice president. You do not have the authority to declare yourself the head of the company. Valerie and Chloe are the primary beneficiaries of the estate. I will be stepping in to manage the corporate assets until the probate lawyers sort everything out." Desmond let out a loud, mocking laugh that sounded like scraping metal. He looked Preston up and down with absolute disgust. "You are going to manage the assets, Preston. You cannot even manage your own garbage hedge fund without begging my brother for a secret bailout. Do not think I do not know about the massive debt you are drowning in, boy. You are a complete fraud, and you will not touch a single steering wheel in my company." Chloe gasped and grabbed Preston's arm, her eyes darting nervously around the room as the funeral guests began whispering frantically among themselves. Desmond had just aired their dirty laundry in front of the entire family and half the corporate board. Preston took a threatening step forward, but Desmond completely ignored him. Desmond reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document bound in a blue paper backing. "You see?" Desmond continued, raising his voice so everyone in the house could hear him clearly. Marcus knew his health was failing. He knew his reflexes were getting slow. We had a long, serious talk the night before his tragic accident. He knew his daughter was married to a financial parasite, and he knew his wife was too busy playing garden club to run a national trucking empire. He wanted to protect his legacy, He wanted to make sure the company stayed strong, so he did the right thing. He signed the company over to the only man capable of running it. Desmond threw the legal document down onto the dining table. It landed right next to a platter of sandwiches with a heavy thud. This is a fully executed corporate partnership and transfer agreement. Desmond announced, a smug, arrogant smile spreading across his face. Signed and dated by Marcus Davis at 11:30 on the night before he died. It legally transfers 80% controlling interest of Davis Logistics directly to me. I am the majority shareholder. I am the chief executive officer. I am the boss. The company is mine. The room erupted into total chaos. Aunts were whispering, uncles were shaking their heads, and Preston was practically vibrating with rage. He lunged for the document, but Desmond slammed his hand down on top of it, daring the younger man to try and take it. Chloe burst into loud, dramatic tears, crying out that Desmond was lying and that her father would never abandon her like that. Through all the screaming and the crying, I did not say a single word. I simply walked out from behind the kitchen counter and moved slowly toward the dining table. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with pity and morbid curiosity. They expected me to break down. They expected the grieving widow to faint or scream or collapse into a chair under the weight of this massive betrayal. Instead, I kept my posture perfectly straight and my face completely blank. I stopped right in front of Desmond. He looked down at me, his smug smile faltering just a fraction under my cold, steady gaze. "Move your hand, Desmond," I said, my voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Let me see the paper." Desmond hesitated for a second, then slowly slid his hand away, leaving the document exposed on the table. "It is legally binding, Valerie," he muttered, sounding slightly defensive. "It is completely ironclad. You can have your lawyers look at it, but it will not change a thing. Marcus gave me the company." I ignored his posturing and leaned over the table. I did not care about the legal jargon or the corporate clauses filling the top paragraphs. I had spent 30 years working as a forensic accountant. I spent my entire career tracking down embezzlers, dismantling corporate fraud, and sending liars to federal prison. I knew how to read numbers, and I knew how to read paper. My eyes immediately dropped to the bottom right corner of the final page, where my husband's signature was written in dark blue ink. To the untrained eye, it looked like a perfect match. It was the same familiar sweeping M and the sharp angular D that Marcus had used to sign birthday cards, checks, and tax returns for the past 40 years. But I did not have an untrained eye. I had the eye of a woman who was currently hiding a text message from her dead husband. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the very specific, microscopic details of the ink strokes. My forensic instincts took over completely, drowning out the loud arguments happening around me. I noticed the pressure of the pen. Marcus always signed his name with a fluid, light motion, barely pressing into the paper. But this signature was different. The blue ink was pressed so deeply into the page that it had actually created a physical groove in the thick paper. There was dark ink pooling at the end of the letters, indicating the pen had stopped and rested heavily on the page before continuing. The lines leading into the letter D were incredibly shaky, possessing a microscopic, jagged vibration that only happened when a person's hand was trembling violently. This was not a signature written freely by a man securing his legacy over a glass of bourbon. This was a signature written by a man who was terrified. A man whose hand was shaking with adrenaline and fear. A man who was pressing the pen down with frantic, aggressive force because he had no other choice. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding a fierce rhythm against my ribs. I looked at Desmond. His eyes were shifting nervously, holding none of the righteous confidence he had just projected to the room. He was hiding something massive. He was connected to whatever dark, twisted nightmare had caused my husband to fake his own death. The signature was either a masterful forgery traced over a light box by a nervous hand, or Marcus had been forced to sign it under extreme physical duress mere hours before his car was set on fire. I looked from Desmond to Preston, who was still arguing loudly with Chloe. Two greedy, desperate men. Both of them holding documents that completely ruined my life. Both of them trying to steal everything Marcus had built. But they did not know about the text message. They did not know that I was absolutely onto them. I folded the document neatly, leaving it on the table. I did not scream forgery, and I did not accuse him. Not yet. I just smiled a thin, cold smile walking away from the table, knowing exactly what my next move had to be. The dining room was still vibrating from the massive shockwave Desmond had just unleashed. I left the forged partnership agreement sitting on the mahogany table and stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. My mind was racing, analyzing every single angle of the disaster unfolding inside my home. My husband was supposedly dead in a fiery crash, but my phone held a message proving he was alive. My son-in-law was trying to steal $10 million to cover his fraudulent debts. My brother-in-law was waving around a forged document to seize control of a national logistics empire. The vultures were fighting over the scraps of a man who was not even truly gone. But before I could formulate a plan to tear them both down, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the silent foyer. Every single head in the living room turned toward the entrance. The funeral guests were already exhausted from the endless drama, and they watched with wide eyes as the heavy wooden door slowly opened. The afternoon sunlight spilled onto the marble floor, illuminating the silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man. It was Jamal, my son, the boy this entire family had spent the last 10 years trying to erase from existence. Jamal stepped into the entryway and carefully wiped his boots on the mat. He was 30 years old, but the harsh lines on his handsome face made him look significantly older than his actual age. Unlike Preston and Desmond, who were parading around in custom-tailored Italian suits that cost thousands of dollars, Jamal was wearing a cheap dark gray suit that was clearly a size too small. The jacket pulled tight across his broad chest, and the sleeves rode up slightly, exposing his thick wrists and the dark grease stains embedded deep into his cuticles. He managed a small auto repair shop on the south side of the city, a job he had built from nothing after a youthful mistake had landed him a brief stint in county jail. That single mistake had been enough for Chloe and Marcus to permanently brand him as the family failure. He was the scapegoat, the dark mark on their perfect, wealthy image. The silence in the room was absolute and deafening. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. The wealthy corporate executives and the judgmental church aunts stared at Jamal as if he had just tracked mud across a pristine white carpet. They looked at his cheap clothes and his calloused hands with undisguised disgust. But as I watched my son standing there, I did not see a failure. I saw a man who worked honest, brutal hours to pay his own bills. I saw the only person in this entire house who was not hiding behind a mask of expensive lies. Before I could even take a step toward him to welcome him into my home, Chloe broke the silence. She pushed her way through the crowd of mourners, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She marched right up to Jamal, stopping just a few feet away from him, and crossed her arms over her chest. Her face was twisted into an ugly sneer of pure entitlement. "What are you doing here, Jamal?" she demanded, her voice loud and cutting, slicing through the heavy air. "This is a private reception for family and respectable associates. You have an incredible amount of nerve showing up here, looking like you just crawled out from under a broken-down sedan. You smell like motor oil and cheap cologne." Jamal did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked down at his younger sister with a steady, calm expression. "I am here to pay my respects to my father, Chloe," he said quietly. "I have every right to be in this house." Chloe let out a harsh, cruel laugh that made my stomach turn. "Pay your respects," she mocked, turning slightly so the entire room could hear her performance. "Do not try to play the grieving son routine with us. We all know exactly why you dragged yourself across town in that pathetic thrift store suit. You heard Dad died and you came running to see if you could get a handout from the estate. You are just a convicted felon looking for a quick payday because your dirty little garage is probably failing." Preston stepped up right behind his wife, wrapping a protective arm around her waist and glaring at Jamal. "You heard her," he sneered, puffing out his chest to look intimidating. "You are not welcome here. Valerie and Chloe are dealing with a highly complex financial transition today, and the last thing we need is a desperate mechanic sniffing around the silverware. Turn around and walk out the door before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The sheer audacity of my son-in-law threatening to call the police on my own son inside my own house made a white-hot rage flare inside my chest. I took a deep breath, ready to intervene, ready to publicly tear Preston apart and throw him out onto the front lawn. But before I could speak, Jamal did something that completely surprised me. He did not get angry. He did not yell or act like the aggressive thug they so desperately wanted him to be. He looked at Preston with a mixture of pity and absolute boredom. He recognized the weak posturing of a terrified man hiding behind a fancy suit. Jamal slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white handkerchief. He wiped his hands, folded it neatly, and put it away. "I am not here for the money, Chloe," he said, his deep voice carrying a quiet, rumbling authority that commanded the room. "You can keep the cars, the bank accounts, and the country club memberships. You have always needed those things to feel important because there is absolutely nothing genuine inside you. I do not want a single dime. I came here to see my mother." Chloe opened her mouth to scream another insult, but Jamal completely ignored her. He stepped around her as if she were nothing more than a minor obstacle on the sidewalk. Preston tried to block his path, puffing out his chest again, but Jamal simply gave him a hard, unblinking stare that made the Wall Street coward instantly back down and step aside. The crowd parted nervously as Jamal walked slowly across the living room, heading directly toward the kitchen where I was standing. I watched him approach, my heart aching with a complex mixture of guilt and overwhelming pride. I had spent years quietly supporting him from a distance, trying to keep the peace with Marcus, while secretly visiting the auto shop to bring him lunch. But I had never stood up and publicly defended him against the vicious attacks from his sister. I had let them cast him out to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. Standing there looking at the strength and dignity radiating from him, I felt deeply ashamed of my past silence. Jamal stopped right in front of me. He looked down into my eyes, and I saw a profound, heavy sadness reflecting back at me. It was not just the grief of losing a father who had never fully accepted him. There was something else hiding in his dark eyes, a deep, terrifying secret that was eating him alive. "Hello, Mom," he said softly, his voice cracking just a fraction. "I am so incredibly sorry for your loss. I know how much you loved him despite everything." I reached out and placed my hands on his broad shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath the thin fabric of his cheap suit jacket. "I do not care what anyone in this room says, Jamal," I whispered fiercely, my voice thick with emotion. "You are my son. You belong here. I am so glad you came." He nodded slowly, but he did not step back. Instead, he took a half step closer to me, leaning his tall frame down until his mouth was hovering just an inch from my ear. The room was watching us intently, but they could not hear what was happening. Jamal lowered his voice to a barely audible whisper, ensuring that only I could catch the words. "Mom, you need to listen to me very carefully." He whispered, his breath warm against my cheek. 2 days before the crash, Dad brought a heavy metal lockbox to my auto shop. He looked terrified. He said if anything happened to him, you were the only one who could open it. I stood there completely frozen as the pieces of the terrible nightmare began finally locking into place. My husband had realized he was surrounded by traitors and ruthless murderers. "We are leaving right now," I whispered, taking his arm in mine. The funeral guests finally cleared out of my house just after sunset, leaving behind a suffocating silence and the lingering smell of cold food. I locked the heavy oak front door and took a long, deep breath. The house felt entirely too large and entirely too empty without Marcus there to fill the rooms with his presence. I walked upstairs, pretending to go to sleep just in case Chloe or Preston were watching from the street. They were desperate, and desperate people do not walk away. I waited in the dark bedroom for 2 hours, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. When I was absolutely sure the coast was clear and the neighborhood was fast asleep, I moved into swift action. I changed into a dark sweater and jeans. I grabbed my purse, making sure the burner phone was tucked inside. I slipped out through the kitchen and into the backyard, walking through the damp grass to reach the dark, narrow alleyway. I knew Preston might have placed a tracker on my vehicle to monitor me. Instead of driving, I walked 3 blocks and caught a taxi taking a circuitous route to the south side of the city to ensure no one was tailing us. The glowing neon sign of Jamal's auto shop buzzed loudly, casting a harsh red light over the greasy, cracked pavement. This was a rough neighborhood, a place the wealthy executives from Davis Logistics would never step foot. Jamal was patiently waiting outside, standing in the shadows by the heavy metal garage door. He wore stained work clothes and looked exhausted but determined. He did not ask questions. He just pulled the heavy door open for me to slip inside quickly. Once I was over the threshold, he slammed the heavy metal door, shutting the thick brass deadbolt. The inside smelled strongly of burnt motor oil and old tires. It was a gritty, honest smell that was a stark contrast to the expensive perfumes and funeral lilies I had been choking on all day. Jamal led me past the elevated car lifts to his small office in the back. Sitting dead center on his scarred wooden desk, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent bulb, was the lockbox. It was a heavy industrial-grade steel safe, the kind you bolt to the concrete floor of a warehouse. It looked out of place among Jamal's invoices and spare engine parts. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, resting my hand on the cold metal. Marcus had bypassed his corporate lawyers to bring this box to Jamal. He trusted his outcast son over everyone else. That meant whatever was trapped inside was dangerous. Jamal handed me a heavy steel crowbar. He told me quietly that Dad did not leave a key and we would have to break it open. We spent 20 minutes driving the sharp wedged end of the crowbar into the seam of the lid. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the bitter chill hanging in the damp garage air. With a final loud, sickening crack of bending metal, the heavy internal steel hinges completely gave way, and the lid violently popped open. I held my breath, completely expecting to find stacks of emergency cash or a loaded weapon. But there was no money inside the box. Instead, the deep steel cavity was filled with thick stacks of paper, bound with rubber bands, and a single black encrypted USB drive resting at the very bottom. I reached inside the box with badly trembling hands and pulled out the top stack of documents. I flipped through the crisp pages. They were offshore bank statements from financial institutions in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, secretive accounts I had never seen in my 30 years of marriage. I set the papers down and picked up the USB drive. It felt practically weightless, but I knew it held the answers to the nightmare my life had become. Jamal booted up his old desktop computer, wiping grease off the keyboard. He wisely unplugged the Ethernet cable, disconnecting from the internet to make sure nobody could track what we were about to do. I plugged the drive into the port, and a harsh red password prompt flashed on the screen demanding secure entry. Marcus and I had built a wonderful life together from nothing, and I knew exactly how his brilliant mind worked. I typed in the exact date we closed on our first tiny starter home. The red screen vanished, and the computer unlocked, revealing hundreds of hidden digital folders and massive spreadsheet files. I pulled up the creaky office chair and sat down at the desk. In that exact moment, the terrified, grieving widow vanished, and the ruthless forensic accountant took full control of my mind. I spent the next 3 exhaustive hours meticulously cross-referencing the digital ledgers on the USB drive with the physical offshore bank statements. My eyes darted rapidly across endless columns of numbers, transaction dates, routing codes, and hidden beneficiary names. I systematically pulled apart the complex web of fake shell companies, phantom freight shipments, and dummy corporate accounts. Jamal stood silently behind me, bringing me cups of black coffee while I unraveled the massive financial conspiracy happening right under my nose. I had spent my professional career dismantling white-collar crime, but the sheer scale of what I was looking at made my stomach churn with nausea. It did not take long for the horrifying picture to come into sharp, undeniable focus. The numbers absolutely never lie to me, and these specific numbers were screaming a terrifying, deadly truth that would change our lives forever. I slowly pushed myself back from the desk, leaning deep into the chair and rubbing my burning eyes. A cold wave of absolute dread washed over my entire body. I looked up at Jamal, who was watching my face with deep, unwavering concern. His jaw was clenched tight, bracing for the impact of whatever I was about to say. "What is it, Mom?" he asked, his voice quiet and thick with tension. "What did Dad get himself into?" I pointed a shaking finger at the glowing computer screen, tracing a long, continuous line of massive, multi-million-dollar transactions. "It was not your father," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It is Preston and Desmond. They have been running a massive criminal money laundering operation through your father's logistics company for 3 years." Jamal stared at the screen, his eyes widening in shock. I pulled up a specific digital ledger labeled with a cryptic routing code. Desmond has been using his high-level executive access at Davis Logistics to manually assign specific company trucks to undocumented phantom routes along the southern border, I explained, piecing the puzzle together aloud. These trucks were never carrying legitimate commercial freight. They were being used to smuggle massive amounts of illicit physical cash across state lines. Once the dirty cash was safely across the border, it was funneled directly into Preston's failing Wall Street hedge fund under the guise of anonymous foreign investments. Preston used his prestigious investment firm as a massive washing machine. He mixed the dirty money with legitimate stock trades, cleaning the funds before quietly wiring the clean money to these offshore accounts. They were laundering tens of millions of dollars every single month. Jamal placed his large hands on the desk, leaning in close to look at the routing numbers. "Who exactly does this money belong to, Mom?" he asked, his voice taking on a hard, dangerous edge. "Who are they working for?" I quickly closed the spreadsheet and opened the final encrypted folder on the drive. It contained scanned copies of terrifying security contracts, intercepted text messages, and photographs of dangerous men. "The money belongs to a highly organized, ruthless international drug cartel," I whispered, feeling the blood drain completely from my face. Preston lost all his legitimate clients' money and fell into massive, crushing debt. To save his own pathetic life, he made a deal with the devil. He brought Desmond into the fold to help wash dirty cartel cash using our family business as the front. I looked down at the burner phone sitting next to the keyboard, and the reality of the situation crashed down on me like a collapsing building. Marcus must have discovered the massive discrepancies in the company ledgers a few weeks ago. He started secretly compiling all of this hard evidence to turn his own brother and his son-in-law over to the federal authorities. That is exactly why they needed Marcus dead and gone. That is why Preston aggressively forced Marcus to mortgage my house, using the massive loan as a desperate temporary cover-up to hide a missing cartel shipment. And that is exactly why the cartel sent a professional hitman to cause the fatal, fiery car crash on the highway. We were not just dealing with greedy relatives trying to steal an insurance payout. We were trapped in the middle of a deadly war with a ruthless criminal syndicate, and Preston and Desmond had just handed them the keys to our entire lives. The early morning sun did nothing to warm the freezing terror deep inside my bones. I had barely slept after leaving Jamal's auto shop. My mind was a chaotic storm of digital ledgers, cartel routing numbers, and the horrifying realization that my husband was hiding from ruthless killers. I sat at my kitchen island, staring at a cold cup of coffee. I knew I needed to act carefully. I needed to gather evidence before going to the authorities. The enemy was not going to give me time. I walked to the kitchen window and pulled back the heavy silk curtains just an inch. Across the street was a dark sedan. The engine was off, but I could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat holding a camera with a telephoto lens. They were watching me. Preston and Desmond knew Marcus trusted me, and they were making sure I did not step out of line. I let the curtain fall and took a deep breath. I had to remain perfectly calm. Suddenly, the heavy brass knocker on my front door echoed through the silent house. It was not a polite knock. It was loud, aggressive, and demanding. Standing on my porch wearing a sharp navy blue suit and a cruel, arrogant smirk was my son-in-law, Preston. "What do you want, Preston?" I asked, keeping my voice cold and steady. "I told you yesterday that I am not signing your papers." He shoved the heavy oak door open with his shoulder, forcing me to step back into the hallway. "I am not here to ask for your permission today, Valerie," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I am here to give you your final warning. You have been playing a dangerous game, and your time has officially run out." He walked into my kitchen and casually leaned against the granite counter, crossing his arms. I followed him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Preston reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. He tossed them onto the kitchen island. The photographs were taken last night in the dark alleyway behind my house. They clearly showed Jamal and me sneaking out the back gate and climbing into a taxi. There were other photos, too, showing us arriving at Jamal's auto shop and standing by the garage door. You thought you were being so clever sneaking out in the middle of the night, Preston sneered, taking a step closer. You thought you could run to your pathetic criminal son and plot against us. But I am not an idiot, Valerie. He has been watching your house, and he followed you straight to that filthy garage. I know you two are hiding something, and I am done playing nice. You are wasting your money on a private investigator, Preston, I said, forcing a dismissive tone. I went to see my son because I am grieving the loss of my husband, and he is grieving the loss of his father. There is no crime in a mother visiting her child. Preston let out a loud, mocking laugh. Oh, please do not insult my intelligence with this touching family reunion garbage. He snapped, his eyes flashing with dark malice. We both know Jamal hated Marcus. Jamal is a convicted felon with a massive chip on his shoulder and a desperate need for cash. He is the weak link in your operation, Valerie, and he is exactly how I am going to destroy you if you do not give me exactly what I want right now. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thick to breathe. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice dropping to a cautious whisper. Preston leaned over the kitchen island, resting his weight on his hands and staring directly into my eyes. Have you read the police report from the accident, Valerie? He asked in a chilling monotone. The car burst into flames almost instantly. But do you want to know a little secret they have not released to the press yet? The mechanic who examined the burned wreckage found something very interesting. The brake lines on Marcus' sedan were completely severed. They were cleanly cut with a professional wire tool. This was not a tragic highway accident, Valerie. It was premeditated murder. I gripped the counter to keep my hands from shaking. I knew the crash was orchestrated by a hitman, but I had to play the shocked widow. Murder. I gasped, forcing tears. You are lying. Who would murder Marcus? Preston smiled, a terrifying predator smile. That is the million-dollar question. Let us look at the facts from a detective's point of view. Marcus Davis was wealthy. His estranged son, Jamal, is a struggling mechanic with a documented felony record, a man who desperately needs money, a man who knows everything about cars and how to disable a braking system without leaving traces. If I make one phone call to the police and point them in Jamal's direction, they will absolutely tear his entire life apart. They will not find any evidence, I said fiercely, my maternal instinct overriding my fear. Jamal was nowhere near that car. You cannot frame an innocent man because you are desperate for money. Preston laughed, shaking his head. You really do not understand how the world works, do you? I do not need real evidence. I have friends in high places. I have associates who specialize in making problems disappear. It would be incredibly easy to plant a pair of wire cutters in Jamal's garage, tools coated with Marcus blood or matching the residue from the crime scene. The police are lazy. They love an easy narrative. A bitter ex-con murders his wealthy father to steal the inheritance. It is a perfect story. They will arrest him today. They will lock him in a federal penitentiary for the rest of his life, and he will never see the light of day again. My mind raced frantically. I knew Marcus was alive and the body in the car belonged to a cartel hitman, but Preston did not know that. Preston truly believed Marcus was dead, and he was fully prepared to send my innocent son to prison for a murder that did not even happen. The cartel connections Preston and Desmond had cultivated made his threat incredibly real. They could plant false evidence. They could bribe corrupt cops. They could destroy Jamal completely just to force my hand. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I could not let Jamal go to prison. I could not let these monsters win, but I also could not reveal that I knew the truth about the money laundering or the burner phone. I had to surrender. I had to let Preston think he had completely broken me so I could buy enough time for Marcus to finish building his federal case. I let my shoulders slump. I let a single tear roll down my cheek. What do you want, Preston? I whispered, my voice trembling with fake defeat. I will do whatever you want, just please do not hurt my son. Leave Jamal out of this. Preston's cruel smile widened into a look of absolute triumphant victory. That is much better, Valerie. It is amazing how reasonable you can be when you finally understand the stakes. Here is exactly what is going to happen. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock sharp, you are going to come to the main boardroom at Davis Logistics. You are going to sit down with Chloe Desmond and our corporate lawyer. You will sign the power of attorney giving me full control over the $10 million life insurance policy. and you will legally endorse the partnership agreement transferring the company to Desmond. If you try to call the police, Preston continued, his voice cold and hard, if you try to stall or if you refuse to sign a single page, I will make that phone call. I will have Jamal arrested for murder before you even leave the parking lot. Do you understand me? I nodded my head slowly, staring at the granite counter. I understand, I whispered, wiping the tear from my cheek. I will be there tomorrow. Just leave my son alone. Preston grabbed the photographs off the counter and slipped them back into his pocket. Good choice, Valerie. See you tomorrow. He turned and walked out of my kitchen, leaving the front door wide open behind him. I listened to his heavy footsteps fade down the driveway. Once I was sure he was gone, I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against the heavy wood and wiped the fake tears from my face. My sadness instantly evaporated, replaced by a burning, unstoppable rage. Preston thought he had cornered a helpless, grieving widow. He had no idea he had just walked into a trap. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind Preston, leaving me completely alone in the suffocating silence of my kitchen. I stood frozen against the door frame for a long time. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Preston had just laid out a perfect deadly trap. He was going to frame Jamal for murder. My beautiful, hardworking son, who had already lost so much of his youth to a rigged system, was now staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence, and Preston was going to pull the trigger with a smile on his face. I walked slowly over to the kitchen island and sank into one of the tall chairs. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I pressed my palms flat against the cold granite countertop, trying to ground myself, but the terror was too deep. It was embedded in my bones. I had spent decades fighting white-collar criminals, but they were greedy cowards who fought with fountain pens and forged signatures. I was now dealing with something entirely different. I was dealing with men who had access to cartel hitmen and corrupt police officers. I needed to talk to Marcus. I needed to know what he was planning because my own plan was completely falling apart. I pushed myself up from the chair and walked upstairs to my bedroom. I went straight to my closet and pulled down the heavy winter coat I had worn to the funeral. I reached deep into the silk-lined pocket and pulled out the cheap plastic burner phone. It felt incredibly heavy in my palm, like a loaded weapon. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the blank black screen. The only message on the device was the one I received during the funeral, telling me he was alive and to trust no one. I had kept that secret. I had trusted no one except Jamal. But now Jamal was the primary target. I unlocked the phone and opened the text message thread. My thumbs hovered over the small digital keyboard. I needed to ask him 1,000 different questions. I needed to know where he was hiding and when he was coming back to fix this nightmare. But I also knew that digital communication was inherently dangerous. If Preston and Desmond had cartel connections, they might have the ability to trace the signal or intercept the messages. I had to be extremely concise. I had to ask the one question that was burning a hole through my sanity since the moment I saw that severed brake line report. I took a deep breath and typed out the words slowly. If you are alive, who is in the casket? I hit send. The small green bubble appeared on the screen. I set the phone down on the mattress next to me and stared at it. The waiting was pure psychological torture. Every second that ticked by felt like an hour. My mind began to race with horrible possibilities. What if he did not have the phone anymore? What if the cartel had finally caught up with him? What if Preston had been right all along and I was just holding on to the delusional hope of a grieving widow? I paced back and forth across the thick bedroom carpet, rubbing my arms to ward off the sudden chill in the room. I looked at the framed photographs on my dresser. Pictures of Marcus and me on our wedding day. Pictures of Jamal when he was a little boy, holding a toy wrench in his greasy hands. Pictures of Chloe before she became consumed by greed and entitlement. We used to be a family. Now we were just players in a deadly game of survival. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I walked over to the bedroom window and looked down at the street. The dark sedan with the private investigator was still parked near the corner. They were making sure I did not run. They were making sure I showed up at the corporate office tomorrow morning to sign away my entire life. I let the curtain fall and walked back to the bed. I was just about to pick up the phone and type another message when the screen suddenly lit up. A soft vibration buzzed against the mattress. My breath caught in my throat. I snatched the phone up with shaking hands and opened the message. The text was short and brutally direct. The cartel hitman they sent to kill me. I trapped him in the driver's seat. I read the words 3 times, making sure my eyes were not playing tricks on me. The cartel hitman. I trapped him in the driver's seat. The reality of those words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I dropped the phone onto the bed and covered my mouth to muffle the shocked gasp that escaped my lips. Marcus had not just survived an assassination attempt. He had actively fought back. He had outsmarted a professional killer and left him to burn in his place. That meant the body we had just buried with full honors and a weeping choir was a nameless murderer sent to destroy my family. A wave of profound nausea washed over me, followed immediately by a surge of pure adrenaline. The puzzle pieces finally snapped together, forming a picture so horrifying it took my breath away. Preston and Desmond had realized Marcus was building a federal case against them. They panicked. They contacted their cartel associates and ordered a hit on their own blood relative. The severed brake lines were real, but they were just a backup plan. The real plan was the hitman in the car. But Marcus was always one step ahead. He had somehow turned the tables on the killer, locking him in the vehicle before it crashed and burned. Marcus used the wreckage to fake his own death, buying himself the crucial time he needed to finalize the evidence without a target on his back. But by doing so, he had unknowingly left Jamal and me completely exposed to the wrath of his enemies. Preston and Desmond believed their hitman had succeeded. They believed Marcus was dead, and the threat of federal prison was buried with him. Now they were just tying up loose ends and securing the $10 million life insurance policy to pay off the angry cartel bosses who were probably demanding their missing laundered money. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats were incredibly dangerous. I realized in that moment that I was no longer just fighting a greedy son-in-law and a jealous brother-in-law. I was dealing with desperate murderers who would not hesitate to kill my son and me if we got in their way. I sat back down on the bed, my mind working with cold mechanical precision. The forensic accountant inside me took the wheel, completely shutting down the terrified mother and the grieving wife. I needed a flawless strategy. Preston had demanded that I show up at the Davis Logistics boardroom tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to sign the power of attorney and the corporate transfer documents. If I refused, he would frame Jamal for murder. If I ran, he would send the police after us. If I went to the authorities right now, without the full scope of Marcus evidence, the corrupt cops on the cartel payroll would intercept the case and we would be dead before sunset. I had absolutely no choice but to play the game exactly the way Preston wanted it played. I picked up the burner phone again. I needed Marcus to know the timeline. I typed quickly. They are blackmailing me with Jamal. They will frame him for your murder if I do not sign the company and the insurance over to them tomorrow at 10 in the boardroom. I hit send and watched the screen. This time the reply came almost instantly. Go to the meeting. Sign nothing. Stall them. I am coming. I let out a long, shaky breath and deleted the entire text thread. I powered down the burner phone and hid it beneath the floorboard under my bed. I am coming. Those 3 words were the lifeline I desperately needed. Marcus was alive and he was bringing the hammer down tomorrow, but I knew I could not just walk into that boardroom and sit quietly. I had to put on the performance of a lifetime. I had to convince Preston, Chloe, and Desmond that they had completely broken my spirit. I had to make them feel powerful and victorious so they would let their guard down. I had to keep them talking and gloating until Marcus arrived to spring the trap. I walked into my master bathroom and turned on the cold water. I splashed my face, staring at my reflection in the large mirror. The woman looking back at me looked older, tired, and deeply bruised by betrayal. But behind the exhaustion, there was a sharp, dangerous light in her eyes. Chloe thought I was just a retired old woman who did not understand high finance. Preston thought I was a weak widow he could easily intimidate with cheap blackmail. Desmond thought I was an ignorant housewife who would hand over an empire without reading the fine print. They had all made the fatal mistake of underestimating the matriarch of this family. I dried my face with a towel and walked back into the bedroom. I went to my closet and carefully selected my outfit for the morning. I chose a simple, modest, dark gray suit. It was the kind of outfit a defeated, grieving widow would wear to surrender her assets. It was not threatening. It was invisible. It was the perfect camouflage for a woman walking into a room full of predators. I laid the clothes out on the chair by the window. I checked the street one last time. The private investigator was still parked outside, keeping watch in the dark. "Let them watch," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them think they have won the war. Tomorrow morning, they are going to learn exactly what happens when you try to burn my house down and threaten my son." I climbed into bed and pulled the heavy blankets up to my chin. For the first time since the horrific accident, I actually closed my eyes and allowed myself to sleep. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. The villains were eagerly waiting in the boardroom to claim their stolen prize, but they had absolutely no idea that the dead man they were trying to rob was coming back to collect their souls. The cold morning sun slowly rose on the very day my own family tried to permanently erase me from existence. I stood silently in front of my bright bathroom mirror, practicing my final performance. I needed to look exactly like a broken woman who had completely given up on everything. I let my hair hang loose and unstyled. I wore the dark gray suit I had picked out the night before, making sure it looked a little too big on my frame. I did not wear any makeup, allowing the dark circles under my eyes to show clearly. The forensic accountant who could decode international money laundering schemes needed to completely disappear. In her place, I had to fully become the tragic, grieving widow who was entirely too terrified to fight back against her own ruthless, greedy children. I walked down the long wooden stairs, my footsteps incredibly heavy and extremely slow. I could easily hear the faint, rumbling sound of a large diesel engine idling out on the quiet street. I peeked through the front window blinds, fully expecting to see the shady private investigator Preston had specifically hired. Instead, my heart violently leaped right into my throat. It was a massive white commercial moving truck parked directly in front of my concrete driveway. Before I could even process why a moving truck was sitting outside my house, the heavy front door swung open. They had used the spare key hidden under the porch planter. Chloe marched into the foyer, followed closely by 4 large men wearing dirty work shirts and thick leather gloves. My daughter was dressed in a pristine white designer outfit, holding a clipboard and looking around my home with absolute disgust. "What are you doing, Chloe?" I asked, letting my voice tremble perfectly. I wrapped my arms around myself, shrinking back against the staircase. Chloe did not even look at me. She pointed her manicured finger toward my antique living room furniture. "Start with the heavy pieces in there," she barked at the 4 men. "Be careful with the grandfather clock because I already have a private buyer lined up for it. The rest of this junk can just go straight into the storage unit." The heavy boots of the moving crew pounded against my pristine hardwood floors. "Stop!" I cried out, stepping forward and raising my hands in a frantic gesture. "Who are these men? Why are they taking my furniture?" Chloe finally turned to face me. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes, as if my presence was a massive inconvenience to her busy schedule. "We are expediting the process, Mom," she said, her voice sharp and completely devoid of any human empathy. "Preston and Desmond are handling the corporate assets today, but I am taking charge of the real estate. Since the house is already heavily mortgaged to cover Preston's business expenses, the bank is going to foreclose soon anyway. I'm simply clearing out the valuable assets before the bank locks the doors. You need to pack a suitcase right now. I have arranged for you to stay at a very modest assisted living facility across town." I stared at her, letting my jaw drop in perfectly feigned horror. "You are kicking me out of my own home," I whispered, forcing thick tears to pool in my eyes. "Chloe, your father just died. We buried him yesterday. How can you do this to your own mother?" I collapsed onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying my face in my hands and letting out a loud, heartbreaking sob. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, but the tears were actually fueled by the sheer rage burning deeply inside my chest. I wanted to stand up and slap her across her perfectly contoured face. I wanted to scream loudly and tell her that her father was alive and that she was going to lose absolutely everything very soon. But I had to play the dangerous game. I sobbed louder, letting my shoulders shake violently. "Please, Chloe," I begged, looking up at her with red, watery eyes. "Please do not do this right now. This house is all I have left of him. The memories are all I have. You cannot take my memories away from me. I cannot survive in a tiny room all alone." Chloe stood over me, looking down with a cold, triumphant smirk. She was thoroughly enjoying her absolute power over me in this moment. She had spent her entire life resenting me for trying to teach her basic discipline and hard work. Now she finally felt like a powerful queen ruling over a defeated peasant. "It is just a big old house, Mom," she scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "And honestly, you are way too old to maintain a property this massive size by yourself anyway. Preston needs the equity immediately. And frankly, I am completely tired of dealing with your constant emotional outbursts. The hired movers are going to clear the main floor today. You have exactly 1 single hour to pack your clothes and get into my luxury car. If you refuse my generous offer, I will have the movers throw your personal belongings onto the front lawn, and I will call the local police to have you legally removed for criminal trespassing." I kept my head down, hiding the sharp, dangerous glare in my eyes. She had no legal right to evict me. The house was still in my name, and the foreclosure process would take months. But she was relying on my ignorance and my supposed fear of Preston framing Jamal. She thought I was completely trapped and terrified. I took a deep, shaky breath and wiped my face with the back of my hand. "Chloe, please," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "I cannot pack my entire life into a suitcase in 1 hour. I need more time. I will do whatever you and Preston want. I will sign the power of attorney. I will sign the company over to Desmond. Just please give me a few more days in this house to say goodbye." Chloe narrowed her eyes, studying me like a bug under a microscope. She wanted to make sure she had completely broken my spirit. My hunched posture and tear-stained face convinced her. She checked her diamond watch. "Fine," she snapped, signaling the movers to stop carrying my sofa. "You have until tomorrow morning. But we are doing this the right way, so you cannot back out later. Preston has arranged a formal meeting with our corporate attorney at the Davis Logistics boardroom tomorrow at noon. You will come to the office. You will sit down at the big glass table. You will sign every single document Preston puts in front of you. You will legally surrender the $10 million life insurance policy, the house, and the company. If you hesitate for even 1 second, Preston will make that phone call to the police, and Jamal will be arrested for murder before you can even leave the building." I nodded frantically, letting out a breath of desperate relief. "Yes, I will be there," I promised, my voice small and pathetic. "Just tell the movers to leave. Please, Chloe. I just want to be alone today." She smiled a nasty, twisted smile that looked absolutely nothing like the little girl I had raised. "Smart choice, Mom. See you tomorrow at noon. Do not be late." She snapped her fingers, and the moving crew dropped my furniture, marching out the front door behind her. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving me sitting on the staircase in the absolute silence of my home. The second the loud diesel engine of the moving truck faded down the street, my tears instantly stopped. The hunched, broken widow vanished. I stood up tall, rolling my shoulders back to release the tension. My performance had worked flawlessly. Chloe was completely convinced that she had won. She was absolutely certain that I was terrified of losing Jamal, and that I would obediently hand over the entire family fortune tomorrow at noon. I reached into my pocket and felt the hard plastic edge of the burner phone. The trap was set. They had given me a time and a location. Tomorrow at noon, inside the Davis Logistics boardroom, the predators were going to gather to feast on what they thought was a dead carcass. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking straight into a federal sting operation. I walked into my kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. "Let them celebrate today," I whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow they will lose everything. They will finally understand the massive mistake they made by trying to destroy my son. I am not just a victim in their cruel story anymore. I am the architect of their absolute downfall and ruin starting right now, today, this morning." The silence in my house after Chloe left was heavy and suffocating. I had played the part of the broken widow, giving my daughter the performance she wanted, but the peace I was trying to cultivate was shattered just 2 hours later. I was standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the cold cup of coffee on the counter, when my cell phone began to vibrate violently. It was my regular phone. I looked at the caller identification screen and saw Jamal's name flashing. My stomach dropped. Jamal never called me in the middle of a workday unless something was terribly wrong. I picked up the phone and pressed it against my ear. "Mom." His voice was low and trembling, with a terrifying mixture of raw anger and devastation. "You need to come down to the shop right now." He did not say another word. The line simply went dead, leaving me listening to the hollow dial tone. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted out the front door, abandoning the image of a weak old woman. I drove across the city, ignoring speed limits and weaving through the heavy afternoon traffic. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. Preston had made it perfectly clear that he was willing to frame my son for murder. I prayed silently that the police had not already arrived to arrest him. When I finally turned the sharp corner onto the gritty street where Jamal's auto shop was located, my heart stopped completely. There were no flashing police lights, but the scene in front of me was an absolute nightmare. The heavy chain-link fence surrounding the property had been brutally smashed open. A large black pickup truck had clearly rammed straight through the thick metal gates, leaving them twisted on the cracked concrete. I slammed my car into park and ran toward the main garage building. The massive reinforced glass windows lining the front office were completely shattered. Millions of sharp glass fragments covered the pavement, reflecting the harsh midday sun. I carefully stepped through the ruined doorway, ignoring the loud crunching sounds beneath my shoes. "Jamal," I screamed, my voice echoing through the massive cavernous space. "Where are you?" I found my son standing perfectly still in the center of the main work area. He was staring blankly at the absolute devastation surrounding him. I walked up beside him and gasped out loud, covering my mouth with both hands. The men who had done this were not just petty street vandals. They were highly organized professionals who knew exactly how to inflict maximum financial damage in a matter of minutes. Jamal's expensive hydraulic car lifts had been deliberately sabotaged with heavy sledgehammers. The digital diagnostic machines which he had spent years saving up to purchase were smashed into unrecognizable pieces of twisted plastic and exposed wiring. Thick black motor oil had been deliberately poured over the clean workbenches, ruining years of meticulous administrative records. But the most terrifying detail was not the broken equipment. It was the massive message spray painted in dripping red letters across the interior surface of the heavy metal garage door. "Tick-tock, widow time is up." It was a direct, brutal warning specifically meant for me. Preston was openly showing me that he was not bluffing, and he had the power to destroy my family at any given moment. Jamal finally moved. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and the raw fury burning in his dark eyes was genuinely terrifying. He reached down and picked up a heavy steel wrench from the floor, gripping it tightly. "This was Preston," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly whisper. "Nobody else would do this. He thinks he can send his rich Wall Street thugs down here to intimidate me. He thinks he can destroy my business and just walk away clean. I am going to kill him, Mom. I am going to drive up to his fancy penthouse apartment and break every single bone in his arrogant body." Jamal took a heavy step toward the ruined doorway, completely consumed by his need for immediate, violent revenge. He had worked so incredibly hard to build this honest business from the ground up. He had poured his literal blood, sweat, and tears into this shop to prove to the world that he was a good man. And Preston had just casually destroyed his entire livelihood in a matter of minutes to make a twisted point. I lunged forward and grabbed my son's thick arm with both of my hands, using every ounce of strength I possessed to hold him back. "Jamal, stop!" I shouted, planting my feet firmly against the oil-slicked floor. "You cannot go after him. If you walk out of this garage with that weapon, you are giving them exactly what they want. They want you to react. They want you to look like a violent, aggressive criminal so they can call the police and have you arrested. Do you not understand that this is a trap?" Jamal glared down at me, his chest heaving with heavy, ragged breaths. "I do not care if it is a trap, Mom," he yelled, the wrench shaking in his powerful grip. Look at what they did to my life. I am not going to just stand here and let that pathetic coward ruin me. I have to fight back. You have always told me to stand my ground, and that is exactly what I am going to do. I am going to make him pay for this." I looked deeply into my son's angry eyes and realized that the only way to stop him from throwing his life away was to finally tell him the dark, terrifying truth. I reached up and gently placed my hands on both sides of his face, forcing him to look directly at me. "Listen to me very carefully, Jamal," I whispered, my voice trembling with profound fear. These were not random Wall Street thugs. Preston did not hire regular criminals to do this. He is working with a massive international cartel. They have been using your father's logistics company to secretly launder tens of millions of dollars for the past 3 years. Your father found out about the money laundering, and he was building a federal criminal case against them. That is why they tried to kill him. They are ruthless, dangerous murderers, and if you go after Preston right now, they will not just call the police. They will put a bullet in your head and leave you bleeding in the street." Jamal stared at me in absolute stunned silence. The heavy steel wrench slowly slipped from his grip and crashed onto the concrete floor. "You have to trust me, Jamal." I continued speaking rapidly to keep his attention focused completely on my words. "I know everything they are doing. I know about the blackmailer and the forged corporate documents. I am currently working on a plan to take them all down permanently. But we have to play this incredibly smart. We have to pretend that they have completely broken us. We have to let them believe that they have won the war, so they will let their guard down. Tomorrow at noon, I am supposed to go to the Davis Logistics boardroom to sign the entire estate over to them. If we retaliate today, they will panic and escalate the violence. We cannot afford to make a single mistake right now. You need to stay here and wait for my signal. I promise you on my life that Preston and Desmond will pay for every single thing they have done to our family. But you have to let me handle this my way." Jamal looked around the destroyed garage, his broad shoulders slumping in reluctant defeat. He reached out and pulled me into a tight, desperate hug, burying his face in my shoulder. "Okay, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I trust you. I will stay here and wait." I squeezed him back tightly, closing my eyes against the harsh sunlight streaming through the shattered windows. As I held my son amidst the complete wreckage of his life, a new profound realization settled deeply into my bones. The cartel was losing their patience. This vandalism was not a simple warning shot. It was a clear demonstration of their ultimate power and their absolute lack of mercy. Preston was completely desperate, and desperate men are incredibly unpredictable. I knew I had to walk into that corporate boardroom tomorrow morning and deliver the most convincing performance of my entire life. If I hesitated for a single second, or if I revealed even a hint of my true intentions, the next attack from these monsters would not just be broken glass and destroyed machinery. The next time they decided to send a message, it would be written in our blood. The stakes were life and death, and there was no turning back. I drove back to my quiet house, leaving Jamal at the ruined auto shop with a promise that everything would be resolved by tomorrow. The drive was a blur of gray streets and cold wind, but my mind was incredibly sharp. The physical destruction of the garage was a clear message that the cartel was losing patience. Preston was a desperate man backed into a corner by dangerous people. I parked my car in the driveway and walked into the empty house. The silence was thick, but I did not have time to sit and mourn. Preston had sent me a calendar invitation for a mandatory video call. He called it a pre-meeting review. It was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I walked into my home office and sat down at my heavy wooden desk. I opened my laptop and clicked the digital link. I had to mentally prepare myself to look into the eyes of the men who were trying to destroy my family. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally ruining my posture. I softened my eyes to look tired and thoroughly beaten. I placed my hands on my lap under the desk. In my right hand, I held the small plastic burner phone. My thumb rested gently on the keypad. I had spent years typing without looking at the keys during long audits, and that specific muscle memory was about to save my life. The digital chime rang from my computer speakers, and the video screen split into 3 separate boxes. In the first box, I saw Preston sitting in his luxurious penthouse apartment wearing a pristine white dress shirt with the collar unbuttoned. He looked smug and entirely too confident for a man who was drowning in illegal cartel debt. In the second box was Desmond sitting in Marcus' old corner office at Davis Logistics. Seeing him sitting in my husband's leather chair made a flash of hot anger spike in my chest, but I kept my face perfectly blank and passive. In the third box was a man I had never seen before. He wore a sharp gray suit and sat in front of a massive wall of expensive law books. Preston introduced him as Harrison, a senior corporate attorney handling the estate transition. I knew instantly that Harrison was the corrupt lawyer helping them forge the documents and launder the money. He had the slick, polished look of a man who sold his soul a very long time ago. "Welcome, Valerie Preston," said his voice dripping with fake sympathy and condescension. "We wanted to have this quick virtual meeting to walk you through the documents you will be signing tomorrow at noon. We know legal paperwork can be incredibly overwhelming for someone without a background in corporate finance, so Harrison is here to simplify everything for you." I stared at the screen and gave them a slow, hesitant nod. "Thank you, Preston," I said, making my voice sound small and fragile. "I am just so confused by all of this. Everything is happening so fast, and I just want to make sure I am doing the right thing for the family." Desmond let out a short, mocking laugh and leaned back in Marcus' chair. "That is exactly why we are handling the heavy lifting, Valerie," he said smoothly. "You just need to listen to Harrison and put your name on the dotted lines tomorrow." Harrison, the corrupt lawyer, cleared his throat and shared his computer screen. Suddenly, my monitor was filled with dense paragraphs of legal jargon and complex financial spreadsheets. The documents detailed the immediate transfer of the $10 million life insurance policy into a private trust controlled entirely by Preston. The next page showed the transfer of the controlling shares of Davis Logistics directly to Desmond. Harrison began speaking in a rapid, monotone voice, deliberately using the most complicated corporate terminology possible. He talked about fiduciary responsibilities, irrevocable asset transfers, proxy voting rights, and indemnification clauses. He was intentionally trying to drown me in a sea of confusing words, so I would just give up and sign blindly. It was a classic intimidation tactic used by dirty lawyers to steamroll vulnerable clients, but they had completely forgotten who they were talking to. I had spent 30 years working as a senior forensic accountant. I ate complex financial spreadsheets for breakfast. I could read every single hidden loophole and predatory clause on that screen in a matter of seconds. The documents were a masterpiece of white-collar theft designed to leave me absolutely destitute while shielding Preston and Desmond from any legal liability. But I could not let them know that I understood a single word. I had to play the part of the financially illiterate old woman. I leaned closer to the camera, squinting my eyes as if I could not read the text. "Excuse me, Harrison," I said, interrupting his fast-paced monologue. "What exactly does fiduciary mean in this context? Does that mean Preston is just going to put the money in my bank account for me? I am so sorry, but Marcus always handled the big words." Preston rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by my apparent ignorance. "No, Valerie." He sighed heavily like he was speaking to a slow child. "It means I have the legal authority to invest the funds on your behalf. It means you do not have to worry about managing the money because I will do it for you. It protects you from making bad financial decisions in your emotional state." I let out a long, trembling breath and nodded slowly. "Oh, I understand now," I said softly. "And what about the house?" "Chloe said the bank was going to take the house." Harrison brought up another document showing a predatory restructuring of my home equity. He explained in overly complicated terms that signing the house over to Preston's firm would somehow magically save my credit score. It was a complete lie, of course. They were planning to liquidate my home the second my signature was dry. But I just nodded again, looking completely overwhelmed and defeated. "It is just so many numbers," I whispered, rubbing my forehead. "I trust you boys to do what is absolutely best." While I was verbally playing the part of the clueless widow, my right hand was incredibly busy beneath the heavy wooden desk. I held the burner phone tightly, tracing the small plastic keys with my thumb. I kept my eyes locked directly on the computer screen, maintaining the facade of a confused old woman listening to the lawyer. But under the desk, my fingers were moving with rapid precision. I pressed the button strictly by memory, navigating to the hidden text message thread. I typed out the crucial information without ever looking down. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow at noon. Davis Logistics main boardroom. Preston Desmond and corrupt lawyer Harrison will all be there. They are bringing all the forged transfer documents. I carefully moved my thumb to the send button and pressed it firmly. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm in my chest, but my face remained perfectly passive on the video screen. I was actively coordinating a massive federal sting operation right in front of the men who were trying to destroy me. The video call dragged on for another 15 minutes. Harrison continued to drone on about the logistical details of tomorrow. Preston reminded me one last time about the dire consequences if I decided to change my mind. He did not mention Jamal by name because the lawyer was on the call, but the unspoken threat hung heavily in the air. "We will see you tomorrow at noon sharp," Valerie Preston said, his fake smile returning to his face. "Do not be late. We have a lot of important business to conclude." I nodded submissively and told him I would be there on time. Desmond gave me a final condescending wave before disconnecting his camera. The lawyer followed suit, and then Preston finally ended the call. The 3 video boxes vanished, leaving me staring at my own tired reflection on the dark computer monitor. The moment the screen went black, I pulled my right hand out from under the desk and looked down at the burner phone. A small green notification bubble appeared on the screen, indicating a new message had arrived. I opened the text thread and read the words my husband had just sent me. "Trap is set. Let them dig their graves." A slow, cold smile spread across my face, completely erasing the frightened widow I had been playing for the last hour. I felt a massive surge of adrenaline rush through my veins. The waiting was over. The long game of cat and mouse was finally coming to an end. Preston and Desmond believed they had completely broken my spirit. They believed I was just a clueless old woman who was going to hand them an empire tomorrow morning. They had absolutely no idea that the trap was already closing around them. I stood up from my heavy wooden desk, feeling much stronger than I had felt in many dark days. "Let them dig their graves," I whispered quietly to the empty room. "Tomorrow at noon, I am going to bury them all." The cold, dark night finally settled over my quiet neighborhood, casting long, heavy shadows across the empty rooms of my home. It was the final night before the massive noon meeting at Davis Logistics. Tomorrow was the day Preston and Desmond truly believed they would officially steal my entire life. I stood silently in the center of my large living room, looking at the empty spaces where my beautiful antique furniture used to be. Chloe had taken almost everything of value during her illegal eviction attempt, leaving behind nothing but bare walls and hollow echoing sounds. But I did not feel any sadness as I looked at the barren room. I only felt a deep, profound sense of calm. The board was set, and the pieces were perfectly positioned. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of cold water. The house was so incredibly quiet that I could easily hear the low hum of the refrigerator. I was just about to walk upstairs and prepare for bed when the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed loudly through the silent hallway. It was exactly 9 o'clock at night. Nobody should be visiting me at this late hour. My heart beat a little faster, but I kept my breathing steady. I walked to the door and pulled it open, expecting to see Preston, or perhaps another cartel thug, coming to deliver a final violent warning. Instead, I found my daughter Chloe standing proudly on the porch. She was wearing a sleek black evening gown and holding a designer leather handbag. Her face was perfectly made up, but her eyes were cold and greedy. She pushed past me without waiting for an invitation and walked straight into the foyer. "What are you doing here, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and submissive. "You already took the furniture today. What else could you possibly want from me tonight?" Chloe stopped in the middle of the hallway and slowly turned around to face me. She looked me up and down with absolute contempt. "Do not play dumb with me, Mom," she snapped, her voice echoing harshly against the bare walls. "You know exactly why I am here. Preston and I were reviewing the estate inventory this evening, and we noticed a massive discrepancy regarding the personal assets. You packed your bags like I told you to, but you conveniently forgot to surrender the jewelry. I stared at her, letting a look of perfect confusion wash over my face. "The jewelry?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "Those are my personal belongings, Chloe. Your father gave those beautiful pieces to me over the course of our long 30-year marriage. They are personal gifts, not corporate assets." Chloe rolled her eyes and let out a loud, dramatic sigh of supreme annoyance. "You really do not understand how a complex financial transition works, do you?" she said, taking an aggressive step closer to me. "Dad bought that expensive jewelry using funds directly from Davis Logistics. Therefore, the jewelry technically belongs to the corporate estate. Since Desmond is taking over the company and Preston is managing the financial trust, those valuable assets need to be formally liquidated to cover the massive debts you and Dad accumulated. You do not get to keep millions of dollars worth of diamonds while we clean up your terrible financial mess. Go upstairs right now and bring me your jewelry box. Every single piece needs to be accounted for before the big meeting tomorrow at noon." I stood perfectly still, letting my shoulders drop in a display of absolute defeat. "You want absolutely everything," I whispered, looking down at the scuffed hardwood floor. "You are not going to leave me with a single memory of him." Chloe smiled a cold, terrible smile. "Memories do not pay the bills, Mom," she said sharply. "Go get the box right now. Do not make me call Preston and tell him you are refusing to cooperate. You know exactly what will happen to Jamal if you decide to be difficult tonight." The threat hung heavily in the air between us. She was using her own brother's freedom and safety as a cheap bargaining chip to steal my necklaces and rings. It was the ultimate betrayal, the absolute lowest point a daughter could possibly reach. But instead of screaming or crying, I simply nodded my head in quiet submission. I turned around and walked slowly up the stairs, playing the part of the completely broken widow one last time. I walked into my dark bedroom and went straight to my heavy wooden dresser. Sitting right on top was the large velvet jewelry box holding 3 decades of anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet celebrations. I opened the lid and looked at the sparkling diamonds and pearls resting on the dark velvet cushions. Right in the center was the massive diamond necklace Marcus had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. It was my most prized possession, a symbol of our enduring love and the life we had built together from absolutely nothing. I knew Chloe specifically wanted that necklace. She had always coveted it, looking at it with greedy, jealous eyes every time I wore it to a corporate gala or family dinner. I picked up the heavy velvet box and closed the lid firmly. I did not shed a single tear. The woman who would have cried over stolen diamonds had completely vanished the moment she discovered her husband was hiding from cartel hitmen. I walked back down the stairs, carrying the box carefully in both of my hands. Chloe was waiting impatiently by the front door, tapping her designer heel against the floorboards. I walked up to her and held out the velvet box. She snatched it from my hands, immediately opening the lid to inspect the contents. Her eyes widened with pure greedy delight as the foyer lights caught the brilliant sparkle of the anniversary diamond necklace. She reached out and traced the jewels with her manicured finger, completely ignoring the fact that she was robbing her grieving mother. "It is all there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Every single piece your father ever gave me. Are you finally satisfied, Chloe? Is this enough to keep Jamal safe tomorrow?" She snapped the velvet box shut and shoved it deep into her large designer handbag. "It is a good start," she replied, her tone dripping with arrogant condescension. "I am glad you finally understand your place in this new family dynamic. You are making the right choice, Mom." She adjusted her expensive leather handbag on her shoulder and looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "You really are pathetic, you know that," she sneered, leaning in closer so I could smell her strong, expensive perfume. "You spent your entire life pretending to be so strong and so incredibly independent. You always judged me for relying on Preston, and you always thought you were better than everyone else. But look at you now. You are just a weak, lonely old woman living in an empty house with absolutely nothing to your name. You folded so easily. Preston did not even have to try very hard to completely break you. Tomorrow morning, you are going to walk into that boardroom and sign away the last shred of your dignity. And then you are going to disappear into some cheap assisted living facility where you belong. You have lost Mom. You lost everything because you were too stupid to see how the real world actually works." She turned around and grabbed the brass handle of the front door. "Do not be late tomorrow," she called out over her shoulder. "Preston hates waiting." The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, leaving me standing alone in the quiet foyer. I listened closely as the sharp clicking sounds of her designer heels faded down the front walkway. I heard the loud engine of her luxury car start up and quickly drive away into the dark night. I stood perfectly still for a long moment, letting the absolute silence of the house wrap around me like a warm, heavy blanket. Then slowly, deliberately, I let a wide, serene smile spread across my face. It was a chilling, victorious smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The performance was officially over. I did not have to pretend to be a weak, terrified widow ever again. Chloe thought she had just walked away with my most valuable possessions. She thought she had completely humiliated me and broken my spirit. She had absolutely no idea that she had just stolen a box of useless rocks from a woman who was about to destroy her entirely. I calmly walked upstairs to sleep. The cat-and-mouse game was finally over. In 12 hours, the FBI will breach the boardroom and Marcus will rise from the dead. The house was silent after Chloe walked out with my jewelry box. I stood listening to the front door shut. I should have gone to bed to rest for tomorrow, but my mind was moving too quickly. Instead of turning toward my bedroom, I walked down the hall and opened the door to my private study. It was a small room lined with wooden bookshelves and filled with the scent of old paper. This was my sanctuary, where I spent decades working as a forensic accountant hunting down missing assets. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I plugged in the encrypted USB drive Jamal and I had discovered. I needed to look at the offshore bank statements and cartel routing numbers one last time. I needed to memorize every detail to ensure that when federal agents breached the boardroom tomorrow, Preston and Desmond would have no way to escape. The glowing light from the computer screen illuminated the dark room. I scrolled through the rows of digital ledgers. Tens of millions of dollars of illicit drug money had been washed through our family business. I printed out a few key documents to have a physical copy. I ran my fingers over the printed spreadsheets, feeling a deep sense of righteous anger. My husband had been forced to fake his own violent death in a burning car just to escape the monsters who orchestrated this criminal enterprise. Chloe might not have known about the cartel hitman, but she absolutely knew about the financial fraud. She was perfectly willing to throw her mother onto the street and send her brother to federal prison just to maintain her luxurious lifestyle. I was deeply engrossed in the documents, reading through a damning transfer record when heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my study. I did not even have time to close the laptop or hide the printed papers before the heavy oak door of my study was violently shoved open. It swung inward and crashed loudly against the wooden bookshelf. Standing in the doorway, breathing heavily and clutching her designer handbag, was Chloe. She had not actually left the property. She must have decided to come back to deliver one final insult to ensure I was completely broken. Her eyes darted from my face down to the glowing computer screen and then to the thick stack of printed financial documents resting on my desk. The smug, victorious expression she had worn downstairs instantly vanished. It was quickly replaced by a dark, twisted mask of suspicion and raw anger. She marched across the room, her designer heels digging sharply into the expensive Persian rug. "What are you doing, Mom?" she demanded, her voice sharp and piercing in the quiet room. She did not wait for my answer. She lunged forward across the mahogany desk and violently snatched the printed documents right out of my hands. Her sudden aggressive movement knocked over a heavy brass pen cup, sending pens clattering loudly across the wooden surface and tumbling onto the floor. I remained perfectly seated, keeping my hands folded neatly on my lap. I watched her eyes scan the top page of the printed ledger. She was not a forensic accountant, but she was married to a corrupt Wall Street broker. She recognized the offshore account numbers and the massive financial figures. She recognized that these were not the standard estate documents Harrison, the corrupt lawyer, had prepared for the meeting. Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "You are supposed to be packing your bags," she yelled, waving the papers furiously in my face. "Why are you digging through Dad's private financial records? What is this garbage?" I looked at her with a completely blank expression. "Those are just some old tax records, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice low and intentionally meek. "I was just trying to organize the files before I leave the house tomorrow. I did not want to leave a mess for Preston to clean up." But Chloe was consumed by her toxic greed, and she refused to believe me. She slammed the papers back down onto the desk with brutal force. "You are lying," she screamed, leaning over the desk until her face was only inches away from mine. "You are trying to find hidden money. You are trying to figure out exactly how much Dad left behind so you can steal it and hide it from us. You have always been absolutely obsessed with controlling every single penny in this family. You never supported my marriage. You hated Preston from the very first day I brought him home because you knew he was smarter than you." She paced back and forth across the small study, waving her arms frantically. "Dad is dead," she shouted, her voice echoing loudly off the bookshelves. "He is dead, and he left the company in massive debt because he was weak. Preston is the only person who can fix this disaster. Preston is the only one who actually knows how to handle real wealth. You just cannot stand the fact that you are no longer in charge. You cannot stand the fact that my husband is taking over the family empire and leaving you with absolutely nothing. Stop holding on to his money like a greedy old bat. You need to accept the fact that your time is completely over. Tomorrow morning you are going to sign those papers and walk away. If you try to pull any stupid tricks, I swear to you, I will personally call the police and tell them exactly where to find Jamal. I will make sure my brother spends the rest of his miserable life rotting in a jail cell." I sat silently in my leather chair, listening to the incredibly cruel words pouring out of my daughter's mouth. She was standing there in a pristine white designer dress, purchased with money stolen from our family business, aggressively threatening to destroy her own innocent brother. She had absolutely no moral compass left. The greed had completely rotted her soul from the inside out. Any lingering shred of maternal guilt I might have felt about participating in a federal sting operation against my own child completely evaporated in that exact moment. She had made her choice. She had aligned herself with dangerous criminals and corrupt thieves. She had chosen money and status over her own flesh and blood, and now she was going to face the devastating consequences of those choices. Chloe finally stopped yelling. She stood on the opposite side of the desk, breathing heavily and glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. She expected me to cry again. She expected me to drop to my knees and beg for mercy, just like I had done earlier in the hallway. She wanted to see the broken, terrified widow cowering in fear. But I did not cry. I did not flinch, and I did not raise my voice. I slowly leaned back in my heavy leather chair and looked directly into her cold, greedy eyes. I let the facade of the weak old woman completely fall away. I allowed the sharp, calculating forensic accountant to take full control of my face. A slow, chilling smile spread across my lips. It was a serene, knowing smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. It was the smile of a predator who had just successfully locked the cage door. "Do not worry, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. My tone was so incredibly cold that it actually made her take a small, involuntary step backward. "You do not need to yell at me in my own house. I understand exactly what is happening, and I know exactly what I have to do. Tomorrow morning at the corporate office, you and your husband will get exactly what you deserve. I will make absolutely sure of it." Chloe stared at me for a long, heavy moment. My sudden, drastic shift in demeanor clearly unsettled her. The terrifying calm in my voice and the dark, chilling smile on my face did not match the pathetic, crying woman she had just bullied in the foyer. She opened her mouth to say something cruel, but the words dried up in her throat. A brief flash of genuine uncertainty crossed her face, but her massive ego quickly pushed the doubt away. She convinced herself that I was just a crazy old woman desperately trying to save face. She grabbed her designer handbag and turned her back on me. "You are completely delusional, Mom," she muttered, her voice lacking the aggressive power it had held just moments before. "Have your bags packed by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Preston will send a car to pick you up. Do not keep us waiting." She marched out of the study and walked down the dark hallway. I heard the front door open and slam shut. The morning sun glared off the towering glass facade of the Davis Logistics headquarters. I stood in the paved parking lot, staring up at the massive building my husband had built from the ground up with nothing but a single rented delivery truck and a relentless work ethic. For the past 3 days, I had played the role of a terrified, grieving widow. I had allowed my own daughter to publicly humiliate me. I had allowed my arrogant son-in-law to threaten the life and freedom of my innocent son. I had let my jealous brother-in-law parade around like a victorious king. But as I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors, the weak widow died completely. I wore a sharp, tailored black suit. My hair was pulled back into a severe, tight style. My posture was perfectly straight. I carried a single, sleek leather briefcase containing my laptop and the encrypted USB drive. The lobby was painfully quiet. The receptionists offered me sad, sympathetic smiles, completely unaware of the massive storm that was about to hit this building. I stepped into the private executive elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. My heart was beating with a slow, steady rhythm. I felt absolutely no fear. I only felt the cold, calculating precision of a woman who was about to execute a flawless trap. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the pristine executive suite. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the main boardroom. The walls of the boardroom were made entirely of thick, soundproof glass, allowing me to see the predators waiting for me before I even opened the door. They were all sitting around the massive custom glass conference table. Chloe was wearing another expensive designer outfit, laughing softly at something Preston had just whispered to her. Preston was leaning back in his expensive ergonomic leather chair, projecting the relaxed confidence of a man who believed he had already won the war. Desmond sat at the absolute head of the table, a position Marcus had occupied for 30 years. Desmond looked incredibly smug, tapping his fingers impatiently against the glass. Sitting next to them was Harrison, the corrupt corporate lawyer, arranging thick stacks of legal documents with precise, calculated movements. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the room. The laughter instantly stopped. 4 pairs of greedy eyes locked onto me. "Welcome, Valerie Preston," said his voice echoing loudly in the spacious room. "Right on time. Please take a seat so we can get this unpleasant business over with quickly." I did not say a word. I walked to the opposite end of the long glass table, placing my leather briefcase gently on the surface. I sat down in the chair directly facing Desmond, keeping my face completely devoid of any emotion. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, and giving me a patronizing fake smile. "You made the right choice, Mom," she said, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. "Just sign the papers, and you can go back to packing your boxes. Preston has already arranged for a moving company to take your remaining clothes to the assisted living facility this afternoon." Harrison, the corrupt lawyer, cleared his throat and slid the massive stack of forged legal documents down the center of the smooth glass table. They came to a stop directly in front of me. "These are the final transfer agreements," Valerie Harrison said, using his smooth, practiced voice. "As we discussed on the video call yesterday, these documents legally surrender your controlling interest in the $10 million life insurance policy and transfer the primary executive voting rights of Davis Logistics directly to Desmond. We have also included the deed transfer for your personal residential property. Everything is standard boilerplate language." Preston reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. It was a pen Marcus had received as an award from the local Chamber of Commerce 10 years ago. Preston had already stolen it from my husband's office. He placed the gold pen on the glass table and pushed it slowly toward me. It rolled across the smooth surface and stopped right next to the stack of forged documents. "Sign the bottom of every single page," Valerie Preston commanded, his voice dropping all pretense of politeness. He was issuing a direct, brutal order. The room fell into an incredibly heavy, absolute silence. Chloe tapped her manicured fingernails against the glass, waiting for me to obey. Desmond crossed his arms over his chest, his face twisting into an ugly, impatient scowl. They expected me to pick up the gold pen with trembling hands. They expected me to cry softly as I signed away my entire life, my home, and my husband's legacy. They were waiting for the final, absolute, ultimate victory. I looked down at the heavy gold pen. I looked at the forged signature on the partnership agreement Desmond had shown me at the funeral reception, and then I slowly lifted my head and looked directly into Preston's dark, arrogant eyes. I did not reach for the pen. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I simply leaned back in my chair and let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was the exact same smile I had given Chloe the night before in my private study. Preston's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. A tiny flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. "Valerie, pick up the pen and sign the papers." He snapped, his voice suddenly tight with unexpected tension. "You know exactly what is at stake here. Do not try my patience today." I ignored his threat completely. I stood up from my chair, the movement slow and deliberate. "What are you doing?" Chloe demanded, her voice rising in sudden frantic panic. "Sit down and sign the papers right now, Mom." I did not sit down. Instead, I unclasped the top of my sleek leather briefcase. I pulled out my thin silver laptop and set it on the glass table. Next, I pulled out the small black encrypted USB drive. The boardroom was equipped with a massive state-of-the-art presentation screen on the wall directly behind Desmond. I walked over to the audio-visual control panel built into the center of the glass table. I plugged the USB drive into the port and connected my laptop to the main network. The large projector mounted on the ceiling hummed to life with a low mechanical vibration. "I am not signing anything, Preston," I said, my voice completely calm, but carrying a sharp, dangerous edge that cut through the room like a physical blade. "Because unlike you, I actually know how to read a balance sheet." I pressed a single button on my laptop keyboard. The massive wall screen behind Desmond instantly lit up, illuminating the dark boardroom with bright, blinding white light. I did not display a picture or a simple text document. I displayed the master financial ledger we had extracted from the hidden lockbox. The screen was filled with thousands of rows of complex financial data, offshore bank account routing numbers, and massive multi-million-dollar wire transfers. Right at the top of the spreadsheet in bold, undeniable letters was the name of Preston's failing Wall Street hedge fund, directly linked to a known shell company operated by an international drug cartel. Desmond turned his chair around to look at the massive screen. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Preston jumped up from his leather chair, his eyes wide with absolute sheer panic. "Where did you get that?" Preston shouted, his voice cracking violently. "Turn that off right now! Turn that screen off!" I ignored his frantic screaming. I tapped the keyboard again, pulling up the intercepted shipping manifests, proving Desmond had been using Davis Logistics trucks to physically move dirty cash across the southern border. "This is a complete record of your massive criminal money laundering operation," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Every single stolen dollar, every single phantom freight route, and every single offshore account in the Cayman Islands. You both thought my husband was just a stupid truck driver you could easily manipulate. You thought I was just an ignorant old widow you could bully and blackmail. But Marcus knew exactly what you were doing. He spent the last 6 months compiling this airtight federal evidence to completely destroy your pathetic little criminal syndicate." Chloe stared at the massive glowing screen, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. She finally realized that the wealth she had been flaunting was built on a foundation of deadly criminal activity. Preston roared, pulling his jacket open. He had absolutely no idea what was coming now, because the real ultimate punishment was finally walking through the boardroom doors today. The bright white light from the massive projector screen washed over the faces of the 4 people sitting around the custom glass conference table. The complex financial spreadsheets and the undeniable proof of their international money laundering operation glowed vividly in the dim boardroom. For a long, terrifying moment, nobody in the room dared to breathe. The sheer magnitude of the evidence I had just displayed completely paralyzed them. Desmond sat absolutely frozen in his leather chair, staring blankly at the routing numbers that directly linked him to the ruthless drug cartel. Chloe had her hands clamped tightly over her mouth, her perfectly contoured face pale and drained of all arrogant color. Harrison, the corrupt corporate lawyer, immediately began shoving his expensive pens and blank legal pads into his leather briefcase, his eyes darting frantically toward the boardroom exit. But Preston did not freeze. The initial shock that had widened his dark eyes quickly morphed into something far more dangerous. He was a desperate Wall Street broker who had spent his entire adult life manipulating the truth and bullying vulnerable people to get exactly what he wanted. He slowly lowered his hands and took a deep breath. Then, to my complete surprise, Preston threw his head back and began to laugh. It was a loud, menacing sound that echoed harshly against the thick, soundproof glass walls. The laughter was completely devoid of any genuine humor. It was the frantic, unstable sound of a cornered predator trying to regain control of a terrifying situation. Preston slammed his palms down hard onto the glass table, stopping his manic laughter. He leaned across the smooth surface, glaring directly into my eyes with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You crazy old woman!" he shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. "Do you really think a simple computer spreadsheet is going to save you today? Do you really believe that anyone in the real world is going to look at those numbers and care about what you have to say? You are absolutely delusional, Valerie. You are just a grieving widow who has completely lost her mind." I did not flinch or look away from his aggressive stare. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely calm. "The numbers speak for themselves, Preston," I replied, keeping my voice steady and even. "The federal authorities will not care about my mental state when they see the direct money trail leading from your failing hedge fund straight into the pockets of an international criminal syndicate. Every single transaction is fully documented and time-stamped. You cannot simply laugh this away. The evidence is entirely undeniable, and it is sitting right there on the wall behind you." Preston scoffed loudly, waving his hand dismissively at the glowing projector screen. "Evidence?" He mocked, his face twisting into an ugly, cruel sneer. "Evidence only matters if you actually have someone willing to listen to your pathetic story. And who exactly is going to believe you, Valerie? Look at your life right now. Your husband is completely dead and burned to ashes in a tragic highway accident. Your only remaining ally is a convicted felon who manages a dirty garage on the wrong side of town. The police already know Jamal has a criminal record, and they will absolutely believe me when I tell them he tampered with Marcus Carr. I am a respected financial broker, and you are just a hysterical old bat trying to cause trouble because you are too selfish to share your wealth." Desmond suddenly stood up from the head of the table, his chair rolling backward and crashing into the wall. He did not share Preston's manic false confidence. Desmond knew exactly how dangerous the cartel bosses were, and he knew that if this digital ledger ever left the room, his life would be completely over. He could not afford to let me walk out of the building. Desmond wiped a thick bead of cold sweat from his forehead and looked past me toward the heavy glass doors of the boardroom. He raised his right hand and gave a sharp, frantic signal. Before I could even turn my head to see who he was signaling, the heavy glass boardroom doors swung violently open. 2 massive private security guards stepped quickly into the room. They were not standard corporate lobby security. These men wore dark tactical uniforms and carried heavy firearms holstered at their hips. They were large, intimidating men with cold, emotionless faces. Desmond had clearly brought them here specifically to ensure the meeting went exactly as planned. "Close the doors and lock them," Desmond ordered, his voice trembling slightly with pure adrenaline. "Do not let anyone near this suite until we are completely finished here." The 2 armed guards immediately obeyed. They pushed the heavy glass doors completely shut. A loud mechanical click echoed through the room as they engaged the heavy steel deadbolts from the inside. We were entirely sealed in. The soundproof glass walls ensured that no one in the outer executive hallway could hear what was happening inside the room. The situation suddenly shifted from a tense verbal negotiation to a very real physical threat. Harrison the lawyer whimpered softly, sliding his chair backward and trying to press himself flat against the far wall to avoid any violence. Chloe stood up, her designer dress trembling slightly. She looked at the armed guards and then looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and cowardly complicity. She did not try to stop them. She just took a slow step backward, hiding behind her husband's expensive suit. Preston walked slowly around the edge of the large glass table, his eyes locked onto mine. He picked up the heavy gold fountain pen that had been resting near the forged documents. He stopped standing directly next to my chair. The fake smile had completely vanished from his face, leaving only the raw, brutal desperation of a ruined man. You had a chance to do this the easy way, Valerie Preston whispered, his voice dripping with venom. You could have just signed the papers and lived the rest of your pathetic life quietly in a cheap little room. But you had to play the hero. You had to go digging into things that you do not understand. Now you are going to sign these transfer agreements, and you are going to hand over the passwords to that encrypted digital drive. I looked up at him, maintaining my calm, serene expression, and if I refuse, I asked softly. Preston signaled the 2 armed guards with a quick jerk of his head. The massive men stepped forward, closing the distance until they were standing directly behind my chair. They loomed over me, their massive shadows blocking out the bright light from the projector screen. "If you refuse," Preston said, his voice perfectly cold and flat, "my associates here are going to physically force your hand onto the paper. They are going to break your fingers if they have to. You are going to sign every single page of these documents before you leave this room. And then I am going to make that phone call to the local police and have Jamal arrested for the brutal murder of his own father. You have completely run out of options, Valerie. The game is over and you lost." The guard stepped closer. One of the massive men reached out with a thick, calloused hand and grabbed my right shoulder, gripping it with bruising force. He pressed his heavy thumb into my collarbone, pinning me firmly against the back of the leather chair. The second guard moved to my right side, reaching down to grab my wrist. His grip was like a steel vise, completely immobilizing my arm. Preston leaned over and forcefully shoved the thick stack of forged legal documents directly under my right hand. He uncapped the heavy gold fountain pen and pressed the sharp metal nib directly into my open palm, wrapping my stiff fingers around the smooth barrel of the pen. The sheer physical reality of the moment was terrifying. I was a 58-year-old woman completely trapped in a locked, soundproof room surrounded by desperate men and armed cartel thugs. They were physically crushing my arm, preparing to forcibly drag my hand across the signature lines of the fraudulent contracts. Chloe watched the violent assault from the other side of the glass table, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She did not say a single word to defend her mother. She simply watched with cold, dead eyes, waiting for the money to finally become hers. Desmond stood nervously near the projector screen, wiping more sweat from his face and urging the guards to hurry up. To any outside observer, the situation would appear entirely hopeless. I was completely overpowered, violently restrained, and completely cut off from the rest of the world. Preston was grinning down at me, his dark eyes shining with absolute malicious triumph. He truly believed he had beaten me. He truly believed that brute physical force was the ultimate solution to his massive financial problems. He thought I was just a fragile old woman who would easily break under the pressure. But as the heavy guard squeezed my wrist and attempted to force the gold pen down onto the crisp white paper, I did not struggle. I did not waste my energy trying to physically fight off 2 massive armed men. I did not scream for help because I knew the soundproof glass would completely absorb my voice. I simply relaxed my muscles and let my hand go completely limp, making it incredibly difficult for them to control the pen. I kept my breathing slow and perfectly steady. I looked past Preston's arrogant face and glanced quickly at the large digital clock mounted on the boardroom wall. It was exactly 1 minute to noon. The trap I had carefully orchestrated for the past 3 days was about to snap shut with devastating force. I had intentionally provoked them. I had intentionally shown them the encrypted financial ledger to make them panic. I needed them to physically lock the doors and trap themselves inside this room. I needed them to demonstrate their absolute willingness to use violence and extortion so the federal agents monitoring the hidden audio transmitters would have all the probable cause they needed. Every single word Preston had screamed, every single threat he had made, and every single action the armed guards had taken was being recorded in real time. Preston grew frustrated by my limp hand. "Stop fighting it, you stubborn old fool," he hissed, grabbing my forearm and trying to manually push the pen toward the signature line. "Sign the paper right now." I looked up at him and smiled, my expression radiating pure, absolute peace. "I do not need to sign anything." "Preston," I whispered softly, my voice completely calm amidst the chaos, "because you are totally out of time." Preston frowned deeply. his brow furrowing in sudden confusion. He opened his mouth to demand what I meant, but he never got the chance to speak the words. The heavy steel deadbolts on the boardroom doors suddenly rattled with a violent, massive impact. The sheer force of the blow shook the thick, soundproof glass walls, rattling the expensive light fixtures above our heads. The villains all turned their heads toward the entrance, their faces draining of color, as they finally realized the nightmare was just beginning. The heavy steel deadbolts on the soundproof glass doors did not just rattle. They exploded inward with a deafening mechanical crunch. The thick, reinforced glass spiderwebbed into millions of tiny fractured pieces before violently blowing apart. A massive battering ram swung by a man in full tactical body armor crashed through the remaining debris. The sheer physical force of the breach sent a powerful shockwave through the sterile boardroom. It knocked Harrison, the corrupt corporate lawyer, completely out of his leather chair and onto the carpeted floor. Before anyone could process the violent intrusion, a dozen heavily armed federal agents poured into the room. They moved with terrifying military precision, fanning out across the spacious boardroom. They wore dark tactical gear and heavy vests with bright, blinding flashlights attached to their helmets. The large yellow letters spelling out the word FBI were boldly printed across their chests. "Drop your weapons and get down on the ground," a commanding voice roared, echoing off the broken walls. The two massive private security guards, who had been physically crushing my wrist, instantly let go of me. They took one look at the overwhelming firepower pointed directly at their heads and immediately dropped their firearms onto the floor. They kicked the guns away and raised their hands in total surrender. Preston stumbled backward, tripping over the legs of his expensive ergonomic chair. He hit the floor hard, scrambling away from the federal agents with wide, terrified eyes. Desmond stood frozen near the projector screen, his hands shaking uncontrollably as a red laser dot appeared directly on the center of his chest. The room was instantly secured. I stayed perfectly still in my seat, rubbing my bruised wrist and watching the magnificent chaos unfold. I felt a massive wave of pure relief wash over my entire body. I looked toward the shattered doorway, waiting for the final piece of my trap to arrive. The team of federal agents slowly parted, creating a clear path through the center of the ruined boardroom. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed against the hardwood floor of the outer hallway. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped through the broken doorframe and walked slowly into the bright light of the projector screen. It was Marcus. My husband was not a pile of ashes in a closed casket. He was completely alive, entirely unharmed, and looking absolutely magnificent. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy blue suit with a crisp white shirt and a perfectly knotted silk tie. He looked powerful and undeniably in charge. He surveyed the chaotic room with cold, calculating eyes before locking his gaze directly onto me. A small, warm smile touched the corners of his mouth silently, thanking me for my flawless performance. Then he turned his attention to the traitors cowering on the floor. Chloe let out a loud, piercing scream of pure, absolute shock. She scrambled backward until her back hit the glass wall, staring at her father as if she were looking at a terrifying supernatural ghost. "Dad?" she gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound confusion and overwhelming guilt. "You are supposed to be dead. We buried you yesterday." Marcus walked slowly toward the head of the large glass table, completely ignoring his daughter's hysterical cries. He looked down at Preston, who was hyperventilating on the floor, clutching his tailored suit jacket. "I am very much alive, Preston," Marcus said, his deep, authoritative voice commanding total, absolute silence in the room. "And I have been listening to every single word you have said for the past hour. The audio transmitters hidden inside my wife's leather briefcase provided a perfect, crystal-clear broadcast directly to the command center parked right across the street. We heard your threats. We heard you admit to framing Jamal. We heard the physical assault. You just handed the federal government the final piece of the puzzle on a silver platter." Preston stared up at his father-in-law, his face completely drained of color. He opened his mouth trying to formulate a lie, but his brain could not process the impossible reality standing right in front of him. Desmond slowly lowered himself into his leather chair, resting his face in his trembling hands. "It is completely over," Desmond Marcus said, turning his cold gaze toward his jealous brother. I know absolutely everything. I know about the phantom freight routes. I know about the money you funneled across the southern border. And I know about your highly lucrative partnership with an international drug cartel. You thought I was just a foolish old man who only cared about moving trucks from point A to point B. You thought you could use my legacy to build your own criminal empire. Marcus walked over to my side of the table and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. His physical touch grounded me completely, washing away the last lingering remnants of fear. I was not running away from the cartel, Marcus explained to the room, his voice projecting with absolute clarity. I never run from cowards. 6 months ago, I noticed a series of massive financial discrepancies in the quarterly logistics reports. I traced the missing funds and discovered the complex offshore accounts you and Preston created. I did not confront you because I knew exactly how dangerous the people you were working with could be. Instead, I took all the preliminary evidence directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I sat down with a specialized task force, and we developed a highly coordinated strategy. For the past 6 months, I've been working as an active, confidential informant. Every single time I sat in a meeting with you, Desmond, I was wearing a hidden wire. Every single time you boasted about a new secret client or a sudden influx of unrecorded cash, you were actively building a massive federal case against yourself. The agents have compiled hundreds of hours of recorded audio and video evidence. We have utilized the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act to build an absolutely airtight case. The RICO Act is specifically designed to completely dismantle large criminal syndicates. By proving that you and Preston conspired to commit systemic fraud, money laundering, and extortion, the federal government now has the legal authority to seize every single asset you own and put you both in federal prison for the rest of your natural lives. Chloe pushed herself away from the wall, her eyes darting frantically between her father and her husband. But the car crash, she stammered, her voice weak and pathetic. The police found your ring. They found your dental records in the burned wreckage. Marcus looked at his daughter with a profound sense of disappointment and sorrow. He had loved her unconditionally, but she had chosen to align herself with pure evil. The cartel figured out that someone inside the company was leaking information to the authorities. Marcus continued, his tone turning dark and incredibly serious. They did not know it was me, but they were getting highly suspicious of Preston. Because Preston is a sloppy, desperate coward, he tried to blame the missing money on me. He told the cartel bosses that I was the one stealing from them. The cartel responded by sending a professional hitman to eliminate me and send a bloody message to the rest of the company. They severed the brake lines on my personal sedan and waited for me to crash on the highway. But the federal agents were actively monitoring their communications. We intercepted the plot before it could be executed. The FBI task force intercepted the hitman before he could reach my vehicle. They managed to trap the killer inside the rigged car and staged the fiery accident on a deserted stretch of highway. They planted my personal items in the wreckage to make the scene look absolutely authentic. The body you buried yesterday was the man they sent to murder me. Preston let out a loud, wretched sob, pulling his knees to his chest. He finally understood the massive, incredibly complex trap he had blindly walked right into. The fake death was the ultimate checkmate, Marcus explained, looking down at the ruined men. As long as I was alive, you both played it incredibly safe, hiding behind layers of corporate bureaucracy. The FBI needed you to make a bold, desperate move to finalize the RICO charges. They needed you to openly attempt to seize the corporate assets using extortion and physical violence. We knew that if you believed I was completely out of the picture, your massive greed and your crushing cartel debts would force you to act recklessly. My death was the ultimate catalyst. It forced you to crawl out of the shadows and attempt to openly steal the life insurance policy and the company. We let you threaten my wife. We let you vandalize my son's auto shop. We let you bring armed thugs into this boardroom, because every single illegal action you took over the last 3 days was meticulously documented and recorded by federal agents. You essentially handed us the final nails for your own coffins. Marcus looked around the shattered boardroom, his face an absolute mask of righteous justice. He looked at the forged legal documents sitting on the glass table and reached out to pick up the heavy gold fountain pen Preston had tried to force into my hand. Marcus turned the pen over in his fingers before tossing it casually onto the floor where it clattered near Preston's expensive shoes. "You wanted absolute control of this company so badly," Marcus said softly. "You wanted the power and the wealth without ever putting in the honest hard work. Well, Preston, you finally got exactly what you wanted. You are now the primary suspect in a massive federal racketeering conspiracy. The cartel knows you failed them, and the government knows you laundered their money. You have absolutely nowhere left to hide and no one left to manipulate." The federal agent stepped forward, grabbing Preston and Desmond by the arms and pulling them roughly off the floor. The metallic clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the boardroom was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The ultimate payoff had finally arrived, and the villains were completely destroyed. The heavy silence in the shattered boardroom was broken only by the metallic clicking of handcuffs. The federal agents moved with swift mechanical precision, securing the men who had spent the last 3 days terrorizing my life. I remained seated in my chair, watching the incredible scene unfold with a sense of profound peace. The massive projector screen behind the glass table was still glowing brightly, displaying the undeniable proof of their international money laundering operation. It cast a harsh white light over the faces of the absolute cowards who had tried to steal my husband's legacy. Marcus stood tall and unmoving, his custom-tailored suit immaculate amidst the broken glass and chaotic debris. He watched the federal agents work with cold, detached satisfaction. He had spent 6 agonizing months wearing a wire and living in constant fear of cartel hitmen just to reach this exact moment. I turned my attention to Preston. Just 20 minutes ago, my son-in-law had been a smug, arrogant Wall Street broker holding a gold fountain pen and threatening to send my innocent son to a federal penitentiary. He had loomed over me with armed guards, completely convinced he was the smartest and most powerful man in the room. But as the federal agent forcefully grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back, Preston's entire facade completely crumbled. The arrogant finance bro literally fell apart right in front of my eyes. He dropped to his knees on the carpeted floor, his tailored suit jacket wrinkling awkwardly as the cold steel cuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. He began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. And then he started to cry. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was a loud, ugly, wretched sobbing. Tears streamed down his pale face, dripping from his chin onto his expensive silk tie. He looked absolutely pathetic. "Please," Preston begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal as the agent hauled him roughly back onto his feet. "Please, you have to listen to me. I did not want to do any of this. The cartel forced me to launder the money. They threatened to kill me if I did not cooperate. I am a victim here. I am just a financial advisor. You cannot send me to prison. I will not survive in prison." The federal agent completely ignored his pathetic rambling, forcefully pushing Preston toward the shattered doorway. I watched him stumble over the broken glass, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping as he wept like a frightened child. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of wealth and power, and now he was leaving this building as a disgraced criminal with absolutely nothing to his name. Desmond did not cry. He fought back with the desperate, flailing energy of a man who knew his life was officially over. As 2 federal agents grabbed his arms, Desmond began thrashing violently, kicking his legs and twisting his torso. "Get your hands off me," he screamed, his face turning a deep mottled purple with absolute rage. "You have no right to do this. I am the chief executive officer of this company. I am a legitimate businessman. I demand to speak to my attorney right now. I will sue the federal government for everything you have. I will sue my brother." Marcus walked slowly toward Desmond, stopping just a few feet away from his struggling brother. "You are not a chief executive officer. Desmond," Marcus said, his voice low and incredibly calm, "you are a common thief who used my trucks to run dirty money for murderers. And as for your attorney, I believe he is currently a little too busy to take your case." Marcus pointed toward the far corner of the boardroom. Harrison, the corrupt corporate lawyer, was currently pressed face down against the carpet with a federal agent kneeling heavily on his back. Harrison was whining softly as his wrists were secured. Desmond stared at the lawyer, and the last remaining ounce of fight instantly drained from his body. He went completely limp in the arms of the federal agents, his head hanging down in total defeat. They dragged him out of the room, his expensive shoes dragging uselessly across the floor. With Preston and Desmond gone, the boardroom suddenly felt much larger and much quieter. There was only one traitor left to deal with. Chloe was still standing pressed against the far glass wall, trembling violently. She had watched her husband sobbing in handcuffs, and she had watched her uncle dragged away like a common thug. She knew her perfect wealthy life had just evaporated into thin air. But Chloe was the golden child. She had spent her entire 32 years manipulating people to get exactly what she wanted. She believed she could easily manipulate her father, just like she always had. She took a deep breath, forcing large crocodile tears to pool in her perfectly lined eyes. She let out a loud, dramatic sob and ran across the room, throwing herself toward Marcus. "Dad," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "Oh, Dad, I am so incredibly happy you are alive. I was so terrified." "You have to believe me, Dad. I had absolutely no idea what Preston and Desmond were doing. I did not know about the cartel or the money laundering. Preston lied to me about everything. He controlled our finances, and he kept me completely in the dark. He manipulated me into being mean to Mom because he said she was going crazy and stealing from the estate. I am a victim too, Dad. You have to save me from him." She reached out her arms, expecting Marcus to pull her into a tight, protective embrace and forgive all her terrible sins. She expected him to brush away her tears and promise that everything would be okay. But Marcus did not open his arms. As Chloe lunged forward, he took a deliberate step backward and raised his hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. He looked at his daughter with a gaze so incredibly cold and devoid of affection that it made her visibly flinch. "Do not ever try to play the victim with me, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice completely flat and unyielding. "You might not have known about the cartel hitman, but you knew exactly what you were doing to your mother." I stood up from my chair and walked slowly around the glass table, joining my husband. Chloe looked back and forth between us, her fake tears stalling as she realized her manipulative performance was completely failing. "But Dad," she stammered, taking a nervous step back. "I love you both. I was just confused. I was scared." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You were not scared, Chloe. You were greedy. You have always been greedy." He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his sleek, black smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, bringing up a saved audio file. "When you are building a federal racketeering case," Marcus explained, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet room, "you end up recording a lot of peripheral conversations. The federal agents tapped Preston's phones months ago, which means they also recorded every single phone call he made to you." Marcus pressed the play button on his phone, holding the device up so the audio would project loudly across the boardroom. The recording was crystal clear. It was a phone call from 3 days ago, just hours after my terrifying encounter with Preston at the church stairs. The sound of Preston's voice filled the room. "I told the old bat about the $2 million mortgage," Preston said on the recording. "She is terrified. If we press her hard enough, she will sign over the $10 million insurance policy by Friday." Then we heard Chloe's voice responding on the recording. Her tone was not confused or scared. It was eager, excited, and incredibly cruel. "Good," Chloe said on the tape. "Make sure she signs everything, Preston. I already looked up that cheap state-run nursing home on the east side. The minute the ink is dry on those transfer documents, I am calling the movers to throw her garbage into a storage unit, and we are dumping her at that facility. I am not dealing with her emotional baggage anymore. I want my house, and I want my money." Marcus pressed the stop button and lowered his phone. Chloe stared at the black smartphone, her mouth opening and closing silently. "You are completely disinherited," Marcus said coldly, turning his back on her. "You are walking out of this building today with absolutely nothing but Preston's massive, crushing debts." Chloe fell to her knees, weeping bitterly. She realized she had lost everything she valued. Marcus took my hand and we walked away, leaving her to choke on the ashes of her ruined life. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom remained completely shattered. The broken pieces of glass covered the expensive corporate carpet sparkling under the bright overhead projector lights like a million tiny scattered diamonds. I stood next to my husband, watching the federal agents finish their highly coordinated sweep of the executive suite. The sharp, metallic clicking sounds of the steel handcuffs were completely gone. The loud, pathetic sobbing of my son-in-law Preston had finally faded into the distant corridors of the massive office building. Desmond and his corrupt corporate lawyer Harrison had been dragged away by armed guards to face the absolute devastating reality of their federal racketeering charges. My daughter Chloe had stumbled out of the shattered room, completely broken and entirely disinherited, leaving behind nothing but a thick, lingering cloud of her expensive designer perfume. The toxic, suffocating energy that had choked this family for so many long years was finally completely eradicated. For the first time in what felt like an absolute eternity, I could take a full, deep breath without feeling the crushing heavy weight of anxiety and fear pressing down on my chest. Once the last federal agent gave a respectful, silent nod and stepped out into the outer hallway, leaving us completely alone, the powerful stoic facade Marcus had meticulously maintained for the dramatic raid completely melted away. He turned to face me, and the sharp, commanding logistics executive completely vanished. In his place was just a deeply exhausted man who had been carrying the terrifying, massive weight of the world on his shoulders for 6 agonizing months. He reached out and wrapped his large, strong arms around my waist, pulling me into a tight, desperate embrace. I buried my face deeply in his chest, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of his clean cologne mixed with the faint metallic smell of his crisp new suit. I felt his broad, strong shoulders begin to shake slightly. My fearless husband, who had just single-handedly dismantled a massive international criminal syndicate, broke down and wept quietly into my hair. "I am so incredibly sorry, Valerie," he whispered, his deep voice thick with raw, absolute emotion. "I am so deeply sorry for the immense, terrible pain I caused you. I had to make you believe I was dead. The federal agents told me that if you knew the actual truth, the cartel would immediately see through the entire deception. Your genuine heartbreak and your real grief was the only thing that kept you safe from those monsters. I hated every single second of it. I hated watching from a hidden distance as they tormented you. I hated hearing that greedy coward Preston threaten to destroy your life. Please forgive me." I wrapped my arms much tighter around his waist, resting my head peacefully against his rapidly beating heart. "There is absolutely nothing to forgive, Marcus," I said softly, my own warm tears finally falling freely down my cheeks. "You did exactly what you had to do to protect our family from pure evil. You stepped directly into the fire to save us. We survived the darkest nightmare, and that is the only thing that truly matters right now." We stood there holding each other in the middle of the ruined boardroom, silently mourning the fractured family we had permanently lost, while simultaneously celebrating the beautiful fact that we were finally truly safe. A few short moments later, I heard hesitant, heavy footsteps crunching slowly over the broken glass in the doorway. I pulled back from Marcus and turned to see my son Jamal standing quietly in the entrance. He was still wearing his thick, grease-stained work clothes from the completely ruined auto shop. He looked incredibly exhausted and deeply confused. 2 federal agents had driven him safely to the corporate headquarters, just as I had specifically requested. Jamal stared at Marcus, his dark eyes exceptionally wide with absolute, pure disbelief. He had spent the last 3 agonizing days mourning a strict father who had never fully accepted him. And now that very same father was standing right in front of him, completely alive and completely unharmed. Dad Jamal breathed out, his voice cracking with immense, overwhelming shock. Marcus stepped away from me and walked slowly toward our oldest son. For years, Marcus had blindly allowed Chloe to be the celebrated golden child, while Jamal was constantly pushed aside and harshly judged for his past youthful mistakes. Marcus had foolishly let the grand illusion of a perfect, wealthy family blind him to the genuine, honorable character of his own children. But the terrifying, catastrophic events of the last 6 months had completely shattered all of those fake illusions. Marcus stopped right in front of Jamal. He did not offer a stiff, formal handshake. He reached out and pulled Jamal into a massive, fierce hug, holding his estranged son tighter than he ever had before. Jamal stood rigidly for a brief second before his tough, defensive exterior finally broke completely. He wrapped his thick, muscular arms around his father and let out a long, shaky, emotional breath. I was so completely wrong about absolutely everything Jamal Marcus said, stepping back and looking directly into his son's dark eyes. I was completely blinded by Chloe's polished exterior and Preston's fake Wall Street success. I let them aggressively convince me that you were a massive failure simply because you chose a completely different path in life. But when the absolute worst thing happened, when my life was actively on the line and the entire corporate empire was crashing down around us, they were the exact ones who betrayed me. They were the ones who cruelly tried to destroy your mother and blindly steal everything I built. But you, Jamal, you firmly stood by her. You aggressively protected her. You beautifully maintained your personal honor and your strict integrity when everyone else completely abandoned us. You proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that you are the absolute best man in this entire family. Jamal wiped a stray tear from his rough cheek, his posture straightening with a profound new sense of genuine pride. I just did what was absolutely right, Dad, he said quietly. I love Mom, and I love you. I really do not care about the millions of dollars or the massive corporate company. I just wanted my family to be completely safe from those terrible people. Marcus smiled a bright, genuine, beautiful smile that reached all the way to his tired eyes. I completely know you do not care about the money, Jamal Marcus happily replied, placing both of his large hands firmly on Jamal's broad shoulders. And that is exactly why you are the absolute only person I can truly, deeply trust to run this entire massive empire. I am completely, entirely done with the ruthless corporate world. I am officially retiring today. I desperately want to spend the rest of my natural life making up for lost time with your beautiful mother. So I am officially stepping down as the head of Davis Logistics today. Effective immediately, I am proudly appointing you as the brand new Chief Executive Officer of this national company. Jamal stared at his smiling father in complete, absolute, total shock. Dad, I am just a simple mechanic, he stammered nervously, shaking his head. I run a tiny, small neighborhood garage. I absolutely do not know how to run a massive national logistics corporation. I do not have a fancy, expensive business degree like Preston. Marcus laughed, a rich, booming, joyful sound that beautifully filled the entire ruined room with pure happiness. Preston had a very fancy, expensive degree, and he actively used it to bankrupt his firm and illegally launder money for ruthless murderers, Marcus said firmly. A shiny business degree absolutely does not teach you how to be an honest, hardworking, successful leader. It certainly does not teach you personal loyalty or strict moral integrity. You beautifully built your own honest business from absolutely nothing. You perfectly know how to manage people. You know how to work incredibly hard, and most importantly, you have a moral compass made of solid, unbreakable iron. You have the exact same fierce grit and pure determination that I had when I first started this tiny company 30 long years ago. I will happily teach you everything you need to know about the complex corporate side, but you already possess the most incredibly important qualifications. The massive company is officially yours, Jamal. You completely earned it. I walked over and happily wrapped my arms around both of my wonderful boys, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of complete, absolute joy. The discarded scapegoat had finally been beautifully recognized for his true, immense value. The cruel golden child had been completely, permanently stripped of her false, unearned power. The universe had finally perfectly corrected a massive, terrible, toxic imbalance in our family. The transition over the next few peaceful months was completely, incredibly transformative. Jamal stepped into the massive role of Chief Executive Officer with incredible natural grace. He brought a totally new, wonderful culture of pure honesty and dedicated hard work to Davis Logistics, completely permanently cleaning out the corrupt, lazy executives Desmond had previously hired. He bought a beautiful new home and finally found the quiet, peaceful life he so deeply, genuinely deserved. Preston and Desmond were both officially denied bail and are currently sitting in cold federal holding cells, awaiting a massive public racketeering trial that will undoubtedly put them behind thick iron bars for the rest of their miserable, pathetic lives. Chloe tried to frantically call me several times, crying and begging for emergency financial help because she was completely, permanently drowning in Preston's massive, hidden, illegal debts. I simply quietly changed my phone number and completely blocked her entirely. I had finally learned exactly how to build a massive fortress of solid, unbreakable steel boundaries around my healing heart. I entirely replaced all my stolen antique furniture, painted the dark walls a bright, cheerful, warm color, and created a beautiful, peaceful sanctuary for Marcus and me to deeply enjoy our true golden years together. As I sit here today peacefully looking out over my beautiful, quiet, blooming garden, I fully realize that surviving that absolute dark nightmare was the only possible way to truly wake up. We often foolishly allow the simple title of family to excuse the most horrific, incredibly toxic behavior. We quietly let people completely disrespect us, aggressively manipulate us, and emotionally drain us, completely dry, simply because we happen to share the exact same bloodline. But true, genuine family is absolutely not defined by a simple random accident of genetics. True, beautiful family is entirely defined by strict mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and pure, unconditional love. Money can blind the people you love, but the truth always survives the fire. Stand your ground, know your worth, and never let anyone, even blood, tell you that you are defeated. Have you ever had to permanently cut ties with a highly toxic family member to actively protect your own personal peace and sanity? How did you finally find the incredible inner strength to walk completely away and successfully build a much better, happier life for yourself? I would absolutely love to hear your personal, inspiring stories and unique experiences in the comments section below. Please kindly share your personal journey so we can all deeply learn and wonderfully grow together. If my personal story deeply resonated with you today, please hit the like button and actively subscribe to the channel for more powerful, true stories of incredible resilience, perfect justice, and fully reclaiming your true power. Share this important video with someone who might desperately need to hear that it is perfectly okay to choose yourself and set massive boundaries with toxic relatives. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember that your personal peace is your absolute most valuable asset.